This podcast contains detailed plot spoilers, adult language, and mature themes. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to a podcast of Rare Antiquities. This Tuesday night, we're sending you back to the future. Episode 30. I am your host, Jeff.
And I am your co-host, Harry.
And I'm crashing yet again. I'm Nathan.
All right. Hey, welcome to the show, guys. Another sort of mini milestone for us, episode number 30. And doing a bit of a special edition tonight, deviating from our regular routine of more obscure films. And we're going to talk about the Back to the Future trilogy. So welcome to the show, guys. Thanks for coming on today. So let's jump into things as we often do and reminisce a little bit. Harry, why don't you talk a little bit about your memories of Back to the Future from the 1985 original to the 89 and 90 sequels?
I never watched any of these in the theater. Unfortunately, these were more always catch on TV movies, even though I was a fan. I wouldn't say a massive fan. The one thing I do remember, though, is two things. Is one, that the fire tracks, when the DeLorean first disappears and you see those fire tracks go under Marty and the dock, my house that I was growing up in, we had a back alley, and me and my neighbors around the same age as I was, we would pour gasoline in tracks, stand over them, and then the other person would light it. So,
of course you did. Of course you did that.
Yeah, so that's one thing that came out of that I remember. And then another thing, I'm not sure if you would talk about this in the trivia, is that I kind of remember when Back to the Future 2 came out, it felt like Back to the Future 3 was released in the same summer. Because I remember, for some reason, I have this weird memory of like a friend saying he's seeing Back to the Future, and then like Back to the Future 2, and a few short weeks later, he's going to see the third one. And I was like, what? That didn't make any sense to me. So
okay, yeah. Well, I guess we could sweep that away right now. I mean, Back to the Future 2 and 3 were filmed back to back, and Back to the Future 2 came out in 1989, in the fall of 89, and then Back to the Future 3 came out in summer of 1990. So they were about 6 months apart as they were made together, but they were not in the same exact time frame. So
that's got to be, I'm wondering if that's like kind of a record for a sequel to come out. I know that sequels have been filmed back to back. There's many Bond movies. We talked, most of Superman 2 was filmed at the same time as Superman, but to be released that quickly back to back, I'm wondering if that's kind of a record in Hollywood.
Yeah, it's probably pretty close. We'd have to do some checking. The Matrix Reloaded and Matrix Revolutions were pretty close together. I think they were released in the same calendar year, one in summer and one in the following fall. So that would probably be the other films that were right next to each other as far as sequels go. But yeah, so Nathan, what about yourself? What's your recollection of when these movies came out and anything you can kind of remember from your childhood around Back to the Future?
Well, I kind of remember neighborhoods being set on fire at the time. I don't know why I'm thinking that. I have a recollection of maybe seeing the first one in the theater, but I mean, it's kind of tied up with memories of being taken there with my uncle, and based on what my mother has said, she said there's no way I would have let you go to a movie with your uncle at that age in that year. And I remember watching this movie all the time on TV, and it would have the crazy TV safe edits, like Jeez Louise and stuff. I remember when 2 and 3 were going to come out, I was so amped to go see it. I was even buying into the hype of the hoverboards being real and everything like that. I'm still convinced they're real.
They're kind of almost here. Not really,
yeah.
But I'd say in the next 20, 30 years, you'll probably see a hoverboard. A legit one, maybe.
A legit one, yeah. The only actual strong memory I have that I think is probably a real one is seeing the third movie with you, Jeff, and I'm and kind of leaving the theater and walking back home. I can't remember what it was. I mean, we'll kind of get into it, but I'm not sure if you remember that at all. But I kind of remember leaving the mall after seeing that. But my excitement for when 2 was coming out, I mean, I was so jazzed. And I remember very vividly obsessing over it.
Yeah, no, I have that vague recollection of leaving the mall as well, walking home after the movie, but
probably because we got in an argument. I'm sure that's why the memory is strong.
Quite possible. Well, I'll tell you guys a little bit about my memory. I think, Nathan, I share some of those memories about going to see the first one in the theater and some of those memories being refuted due to the company that we were keeping. But
the more interesting question here is your uncle? I mean,
yeah.
Unless it's a bad memory.
He has passed away, but he did have a bit of a drug problem. I have very fond memories of him. Like, he was not I never remembered him as a bad person. Or our other uncle as well, who I may or may not have been with us. But I think, Jeff, like, maybe we just reinforced it back and forth over the years, or maybe someone else was there with us. I'm pretty sure that he was at least there when we went and saw it.
Yeah, no, I think so. And I also think the consensus is that he was well loved by everybody, just not necessarily well trusted by everybody.
Yeah.
But I have a strong recollection of, I would have been about 6 years old at the time, I could not understand, at the end of the movie, not that we want to get into all the details, but I have a strong recollection not being able to understand how Marty was in two places at once when he's watching himself. He's watching the parking lot scene unfold at the end. I didn't get it. And I kept trying to I kept asking questions of all of the frustrated adults around me, like how this is possible. And yeah, I shared the excitement for when the second one was coming out. I absolutely could not wait to see that. Couldn't wait to see what the future looked like. That was going to be it. The most exciting thing ever. We'd never really seen the near future before. It was always the far-flung future, Star Trek or other science fiction. This was going to be our world, and for some reason that the excitement just did not have a cap on it. I couldn't have been more excited. And as for the third one, I mean, it kind of, again, they were both coming out within a few months of each other, so they were sort of tied together. It probably didn't get a chance, the third one, to ride the wave of that excitement. So it was kind of coming down off the high to see the third one. But anyway, so that's the recollection. Harry, I'm surprised to hear that you did not go to see any of these in the theater. That's just downright shocking.
When I was young, like as I mentioned in a couple other podcasts, most of my experiences with all of these movies were just on TV. We really didn't see a lot of movies in the theater. The only ones that I really did see fully were the Star Wars ones. As I said, when I got into my teenage years, then it was different. But when I was young, it was really just Star Wars and Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. I got dragged by my cousin to see it. I mean, I'm happy that happened, but funny story, I forgot my glasses at home, and I was visiting in Edmonton at my cousin's house. And I forgot my glasses at home, and my only memory is my uncle just yelling at me. Paid for your ticket? All you see is blurry pictures now. So.
Is your dad Larry David? Or your uncle Larry David?
And yeah, that uncle is sadly passed away as well. So it's a fond memory.
Some weird parallels here. I'll throw some trivia out and then we'll roll into the films here. So Back to the Future, we'll talk about first. Came out the summer of 1985. Pretty modest budget, even for the mid-'80s. $19 million approximate budget. And its domestic gross was $210 million. So Back to the Future was a smash hit for Universal Studios. And, obviously we're here over 30 years later talking about it. There's still holds a place in pop culture. I mean, there's still conventions. There's still new toy lines that come out, new games, ongoing comic books.
The shoes.
Back to the Future. What's that?
The shoes.
The shoes, yeah, the shoes. We can talk about the shoes. I mean, it has not faded from pop culture. It's still out there for sure, which is nice to see, I think. Cool little story. If you watch the commentary on the DVD or the Blu-ray, I mean, it's not an obscure one, but I always thought it was funny. Head of Universal Studios at the time, Sid Sheinberg, he did not like the title Back to the Future, and he sent a memo to the director, Robert Zemeckis, and had suggested an alternate title, Spaceman from Pluto, for Back to the Future. And his thinking was that he didn't like... Scene? Well, to pull from that one scene, yeah, when he goes to visit his father there as Darth Vader from Vulcan, only he suggested that scene be changed so that he was, so-and-so from Pluto. And his reasoning was that the title was confusing, Back to the Future. What happened around the title is Steven Spielberg, who was a producer on the film, he actually sent a memo back to Sid Sheinberg saying, wow, that was a really hilarious joke. Thanks. We all had a good laugh about it on the set. Such a funny guy. Ha, ha, ha. And
that's a good way of kind of dousing the fire. The big boss is like, one wants to make a change, and here's the best way to say fuck you, but politely.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. So credit to Steven Spielberg for saving. I don't think Spaceman from Pluto would have been the smash hit that Back to the Future became. But it was kind of a neat story. Now, that being said...
Like Spielberg needs a few notes sent back his way these days.
Well, these days, maybe so. Speaking of Spielberg, in a way, and Harry, you'll probably like this. Sid Sheinberg had a number of notes for the original screenplay. One of the original ideas for the time machine, before they had the idea to build it into a car, was that it was going to be inside a refrigerator taken to an atomic bomb test site.
As I said, Spielberg also needs to get worked.
So that was
and this
the original.
goes back to what I was telling you. Remember a while we've had this conversation a couple of times that Spielberg himself has gotten quite lucky because other people have actually shot down his ridiculous ideas, going all the way back to Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Well, and you know what? That's true for probably every single successful director. They eventually, they obviously they thought that was stupid. They did come up with the car eventually, built it into the DeLorean because it looked kind of futuristic, especially with the gull wing doors. They still maintained or retained the idea of a nuclear blast playing a part at the end of the film, the original ending, and they storyboarded this out, and you can see it on the Blu-ray or the DVD. Marty had to drive the DeLorean into an atomic explosion in order to get back to the future, and that was the climax of the film, and that was shot down as well, partly because of budget, but also partly because they didn't want to bring, we're still in the Cold War. They didn't want to make nuclear weapons part of the story. They just didn't think that was going to play very well. So Sid Sheinberg, again, speaking of him, he shot down the original idea of Doc having a chimpanzee as a sidekick instead of a dog named Einstein. Without that studio head, we would have seen Doc Brown palling around with a chimpanzee in a diaper.
Coco the monkey.
Not all suggestions from studio heads are stupid. So, and then famously, just to wrap up the trivia here, the original casting of Eric Stoltz as Marty McFly, Michael J. Fox was originally wanted for Marty. He was the first choice, but his commitment to family ties made that impossible. They brought on Eric Stoltz. They filmed for 6 weeks with Eric Stoltz, which is a long time for a movie that had a pretty short production schedule. And they gave him the boot. It just was not working out. They didn't have any chemistry. The lines were flat. The comedy just wasn't there. They went after Michael J. Fox again and worked out a shooting schedule. So Michael J. Fox basically worked, 12 hours a day on Family Ties and then would work overnight on Back to the Future, get a couple hours sleep, and then do that again. And he did that for 7 days a week for the entire shooting schedule of the first film. So he was certainly, good for him. That's a tough shooting schedule, but we get some magic after all.
So I have one thing I just want to add, because I just thought of this now, Jeff, as you were going over the trivia and brought up Eric Stoltz. The TV show Fringe had like a little bit of an in-joke where on the alternate Earth, Jeff, I know you've watched Fringe. Harry, I don't know if you ever watched it, but
not
okay. Well, and on the alternate Earth, the two guys come out of a movie theater and it's Back to the Future starring Eric Stoltz. Now, I kind of wonder if that version on that Earth had the chimp, had the fridge, and the bomb as well. All those elements, like just how weird that would have been.
That would have been pretty awesome, actually. And they did have neat little in-jokes on Fringe like that as well. But that's pretty cool. All right, well, why don't we jump into the movie here? Do you guys have any thoughts before we sort of start our thoughts on Back to the Future?
Well, I guess the only thing I was wondering, I guess we can talk about it as we go through, but just Michael J. Fox in general. The unfortunate, reality of his Parkinson's disease has kind of removed him from major acting roles these days. He's pretty much retired at this point. I know he was doing some small things here and there, and I know he was on Curb fairly recently in a few episodes. But aside from that, he hasn't done much because he's just unable to.
He was in The Good Wife a number of times, and he was really good in that because he sort of played, against type is the wrong way to put it, but he's kind of a jerk in that. And it was a very kind of different way, even though he had, they at times I thought played up the disease a little bit too much. They changed it for his character, but I thought it was interesting to see him as almost predatory lawyer. It was an interesting role.
Considering what's happened to him, he's still done very well for himself, and he's able to kind of poke fun at the disease that he's unfortunately been dealing with. It just, for me, is just really sad. It's not that it's hard to watch Michael J. Fox. It's just, I thought he had a lot of potential as a comedic actor. It's really just a shame that we are robbed with, from all these future roles he could have been in. And I know he was more on the TV side towards the end of his career, but, I remember in the 90s, he was a really big, pretty much everywhere, a lot of movie roles. So, and I always enjoyed him in most of everything I watched him in.
I mean, he actually did have his own show. I don't remember which network, but it was a network, and that it was only 1 or 2 years ago, called The Michael J. Fox Show. And he was obviously the main character on there. It just didn't get picked up. It just wasn't very well reviewed. It wasn't well watched. Nobody, just ratings. But he's on TV fairly recently. The show didn't do all that well. So who knows, if it had been fine, he might still be a working actor, But yeah, he's definitely tapered off a bit. His role as himself on Curb Your Enthusiasm, I thought was really funny because he was also kind of a dick on that show. Everybody's a dick to Larry David because he's such an asshole. So it's sort of fitting.
No, take that back. Larry is a god amongst nobodies.
Yeah, no, we'll go with that. We'll go with that. Like a lesser god, maybe, like more of a demigod than an actual god, I think. So yeah, we'll talk more about Michael J. Fox as we go through here. So, I'm not going to do the scene by scene breakdown of Back to the Future. I think we've all seen the film enough times to idea what's going on. So we'll just talk about, different topics, and you guys can feel free to, jump in and bring things up as we go. Let's talk about Christopher Lloyd and Michael J. Fox and their performances. Obviously, those two guys and their relationship anchors the trilogy. So, Nathan, why don't you start us off here? Just tell us, what your thoughts are with those two guys, their performance and the chemistry between those two guys.
Well, considering like how late into the production that Michael J. Fox, when he entered, it's great that him and Christopher Lloyd had such great chemistry, because I think they recast the girlfriend. I mean, that's a smaller role.
Yeah,
the role of Jennifer. Did they not? Okay,
they did, but the previous actress, when they kind of had Eric Stoltz, she never filmed any scenes.
Oh, I see. Okay. So, yeah, I think it's funny because these two really carry the movie. There's so many great performances in it, but it's them playing off each other that carries a lot of the movie for me. And, it was a very long time before I ever thought it was weird that a teenager was hanging out with this old creepy dude.
Yeah. Still is kind of a little strange.
It's weird. I want to know like how that started exactly. But because of the timeline, Dr. Brown kind of forced this friendship at all. I don't know. It's pretty strange.
Is that the excuse of every pedophile? I'm not sure.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, I was like, when I was that young, I hung out with old guys all the time. And now that I'm older, I'm hanging out with teenagers all the time. So maybe it's not that strange. Also, I really think Christopher Lloyd's actually or at least was quite a good actor back in the day, because I used to watch Taxi all the time. I always got a laugh out of him. And I think later in the movie, it's probably one of my favorite scenes in the whole movie, like the really emotional scene that they have before a final scene of Marty actually going back to the future. That interchange and everything like that is it's great, and those actors play off each other really well.
You're right. Without the quality of their interplay and just the chemistry that they have, you buy it. You buy the relationship. You never really ask the question why this zany old mad scientist is friends with this slacker teenager. That relationship makes no sense, but you never even bother to ask a question because they're so good together. They sell it so well. I think that as the script developed, it kind of got written out how they became friends. I mean, originally they were selling bootleg VHS tapes in order to finance the time machine. So I think that the start of their relationship was sort of a Breaking Bad type of relationship where they had this sort of mini criminal enterprise going on. And that's how it got started. But they got rid of all of that shit, but didn't really replace it with anything. But
that'd be a good SNL short.
That'd be hilarious.
Two guys there and do that. That'd be fun.
Yeah. So, Harry, what do you think about the chemistry between the two, the relationship between those two characters, and the quality of the performance?
Yeah, the performances goes without saying. Both are very stellar performances here. They have great chemistry. I agree. They completely make you forget why they're hanging out. You could see almost like a reason why Doc Brown would want anybody to hang out with him because he's an eccentric loner. So if a younger adult is taking an interest in science or hanging out with him or helping him with his dog, I mean, he'll go along with it. The real interesting head scratcher is why would Marty McFly, who's interested in only girls and skateboarding and his band, would care to waste time with Doc Brown? But I agree with you that they don't really linger on that question, and their chemistry is so good that you forget about it. But yeah, they have great comedic timing with each other. It's very natural, and it was a great choice good decision to get rid of Eric Stoltz. Nothing against him. I don't think I've ever seen him in anything, but yeah, Michael J. Fox definitely has better acting and comedic chops. The movie is just excels so well because of them, but the acting overall with the other characters, I mean, Leah Thompson and guy who plays Biff and also Crispin Glover as George McFly. Even all the B players, they all do great jobs in this movie. So the acting all around is just very good. Excellent.
That brings me to my next point. Let's talk a little about Crispin Glover. I don't even really know where to start with Crispin Glover. So yeah, Harry, you go with that.
I think we all know kind of some of the issues after this movie. His ego, and I think the rumor had it that he was demanding too much money, and, he thought he was a big shot and all that stuff, and the next big thing, and that's why he got slashed from the sequels and created issues with him in Hollywood. But in this movie, I thought he was very good. He played the part very well as a dorky teenager, insecure father. He portrayed that insecurity at the beginning of the movie, and then you see him with that insecurity and dorkiness, and, he's a very relatable character when you see him as a younger person, or even as that, dorky adult. And then at the end, he's a bit more confident, and because things changed for him because of Marty, helping him out and stuff like that. And I thought he did a really good job, personally.
Yeah, I thought he did a good job and, plays it over the top, but effectively. I especially love his original 1985 version where he's the old man loser and that stupid laugh that he has when he's watching reruns and the big glasses.
On the issue of Crispin Glover, I think also, too, the other thing that sort of soured his relationship with Hollywood, I believe he sued the producers of Back to the Future when the second movie came out.
Yeah, that's true.
For something using his likeness. And actually, another thing I like about the way this movie is layered is when I watched it as a kid, I didn't really understand a lot of the interplay when Marty goes back to the 50s and he's finding out things about his father. And his father is, talking about all his insecurities and stuff like that. And Marty kind of relates to it there, with his music and his father's writing. As a kid, I didn't pick up on any of that. It's just like, whatever, this is just dumb stuff. Let's get to the cool stuff later. And so I think it's just some really smart writing there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we'll definitely talk a bit about that later. Let's talk about Thomas F. Wilson, who played Biff Tannen. I love this guy in this role. I love the character of Biff Tannen. Perhaps a little bit too aggressive for, what's supposed to be a 17-year-old kid, but I thought he played that role fantastically. He ad-libbed a little bit. Legend has it that Thomas Wilson came up with the line, "Make like a tree and get out of here" on set.
Such a great line.
Such a great line. It's one of the best. And Butthead as well, I think they say was also his creations. I mean, is this an effective antagonist for the movie? And does he, again, like I say, I think he comes across a little aggressive for a 17-year-old. I mean, more of a frat boy when he basically tries to rape Lorraine at the end there. Let's talk a bit about Biff and Thomas Wilson. Harry, what do you think?
Oh, excellent acting by this guy. I guess he just got typecast. I'm not sure what his story is after this, but thought he did a really good job in at least the first two, and I guess mostly in the third one. Yeah, I have no issues. I think I remember in high school, they were big, tough, frat boy-esque type characters like this, even in high school, and exactly like Biff. And it's not that it's unheard of that guys like that try and, take advantage of girls even at that age. So 16, 17, 18, if you're, you got the size and you got the ability. Unfortunately, some of those idiots just, they act that way. Not surprising to me, so I thought he fit the bill very well. So it didn't seem like a stretch to me, and I thought he did a very good job. I loved how he was able to portray himself as this confident loser in the future, in the original timeline, and then that, he's still a loser when he was younger, and then a different type of loser, a more passive, he's lost all of his confidence at the end of the movie. So I thought that was really great. So good arc for the character.
Yeah, I loved his, the new 1985 version of him after Marty changes everything, and he's just such a wimp.
And he's He kind of does the Christopher Reeve thing, with Clark Kent. Now his shoulders are all slumped.
Yeah.
And he's a
totally.
little bit more of a hunch and a little joyful and hoppy. And I thought that was kind of funny. So
yeah, I thought that was hilarious and excellent play by him. Just another bit of trivia here. He actually carries around with him a postcard because he gets approached on the street like all the time, and people want to say shit to him thinking he's Biff, right? As actors are often mistaken for the characters that they're most famous for. So he doesn't engage with those fans. He takes the card out of his pocket and he hands it to them, and it's like an FAQ card saying, no, I'm not Biff, and has some trivia from the movies and stuff. So it's kind of a funny thing that he does. He actually does a lot of. He does a lot. He does stand-up comedy still, but he's still worked as an actor.
I've not seen him in anything beyond these movies.
He does a lot of voice over work, but he's appeared as, in live action stuff, but a lot of stuff as a voice actor now. So Nathan, what about you? Do you want to weigh in on Biff Tannen?
Yeah, no, I really like Thomas Wilson. And yeah, by all accounts, he's supposed to be like a super sweet guy. And so the character of Biff is just the exact opposite of what he's really like. Although I heard he did not get along with Eric Stoltz. That's what I read once.
He didn't like Eric Stoltz being hardcore method actor for this type of movie. So yeah, they didn't dig it.
He was method on this?
Eric Stoltz demanded that everybody call him Marty, and he would stay in costume like on his way to and from the set.
Oh, Jesus. Who is he? Fucking Jared Leto? Come on, man.
Yeah, really.
So, yeah, I think, Harry, to your point, or I remember like a lot of guys kind of like this as well, and overall, I think a lot of 80s bullies were played this way in movies. Even though he's maybe just a tad more murderous than what was probably normal for a high school bully. And I thought that the way he was just kind of like, just a complete dum-dum the whole time, but so confident. And I like that switch at the end. I mean, that's some pretty good acting right there to go from the, still like the adult bully to the almost effeminate type of character towards the end. It's still strange to me that they would even let him around the house. Because the date rape thing.
Point. Like, why would they even want? I guess you could see that maybe George McFly was kind of a dick this whole time because that's his revenge. Yeah. You can now be my servant.
Yeah.
But I would just say this guy kind of almost raped my now wife. Why the fuck would I want him around my house?
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, it's just
But that's for the movie, right? Like
a sign. That's for the movie, but still, I think it's also a sign of the times as well, where the idea of date rape. I mean, I don't even know if that term would have even been in the lexicon of the time, right? So it's like, it's just the thing that kind of happened, and they kind of gloss over it. Now, like, there's no way. I mean, they would probably still maybe do that scene, but it's kind of hard to imagine that McFly would allow this monster to be around his family 30 years later. So
I just picture George McFly, just like when at the end he's like double, questioning Biff and doubting Biff about the wax or the second coat of wax, and he goes, "Now, Biff, you're not trying to screw me, are you?" It's like, is that what the kind of tone he would take if he saw Biff trying to rape his wife again? Now, Biff, not trying to screw me again, are you?
What he should have done is just walked out of that street and just punched him right in the face again and said, "You're going to do that second coat, Biff." But all through, actually, I like him through all three of these movies.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the other aspects of the production here. I wanted to talk about the music, the score by Alan Silvestri, and a lot of the songs by Huey Lewis and the News. So originally, Alan Silvestri had done a score for the opening of the film, sort of an opening. I don't want to say jingle is not the right word, but that was eventually cut. So his score doesn't start until I think it's 18 minutes into the film. Was the first time you hear the score for this film. I want to ask the question, is this score or the theme song for Back to the Future, is it among, the iconic 80s scores? Is it there with John Williams and so forth? Nathan, I'll let you weigh in first.
That's tough. I love the theme music, and for me it invokes some warm fuzzies when I hear it, and it plays really well in certain scenes and some of the other pieces of the score. Hard to say how truly iconic it is because it's not like a John Williams score where you'll sometimes see it pop up, like Superman is an easy one where it's just used as a shorthand, right? And everyone instantly knows it. Everyone instantly knows Star Wars, like Jurassic Park. People know that one. I don't ever really hear any of the score from this movie used anywhere else as sort of a shorthand, but it's instantly recognizable, I think.
You're talking more about the motif or leitmotif, that if that's the proper term, which I think it is, that John Williams uses for, shorthand, is you're talking about is relatable themes to a character.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we really have that in the movie. I meant more shorthand for like when you have just some music that's just instantly recognizable to just a property in general, right? And Back to the Future, it has a theme song that's very recognizable, but I don't know if it's on like a level of a lot of other 80s movies necessary. It's up there. But I think that a lot of the score of this film plays really well with certain scenes. The one scene I mentioned before that's a favorite of mine, when they're having their final interaction together before he goes back to the future, that music that plays, I mean, when I just hear that alone, when I was watching the movies and I was watching over the credits, that piece of the score comes up, immediately thought back to that scene. And it's to me, it invokes a lot of feelings.
Yeah, Harry, I'll let you weigh in on the score because I know you're definitely a big fan of a movie scored well.
Yeah, and I hate to say it, but this movie and the trilogy is unfortunately not scored very well. It is an above average score, and the main theme is very recognizable. I would say like those few notes, just like, that when Superman's notes come in, it's like da 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 da, and then, you have Back to the Future's kind of very short 4 or 5 notes that kind of identify the main theme is there. And it's up there with some of the more 80s iconic notes or themes, but it's about 4 notes. And what happens, and I've noticed through not just this movie, but the entire trilogy, is that he really only uses those notes, and then he has other music too that feels ripped out of Predator. Like there's a kind of a little bit of a militaristic march that I found, action scenes or the lead up to action scenes, more of the suspenseful thing, scenes that are happening in the movie. It felt like I was watching Predator, and I think Alan Silvestri scored Predator. So whether this came first or Predator came first, I don't know. Probably this came first, but it just felt like I was listening to Predator, and it's not that unique. And that's part of the problem I have. And the rest of the action tracks kind of just replay the same music over and over and over again, even within the same movie. And it was a bit disappointing. When you're young, you don't really care too much because the main themes kind of stands out and it's like, ooh, okay, that's cool. And, you get a little older and now we're trying to critique it a little bit more. I was a bit let down. I haven't seen these movies in a while. So when I went back, it's something I paid attention to. And yeah, I was a bit disappointed in the score.
The second two, I strongly agree with that. Like where the score, I mean, it doesn't even match the scene that's playing sometimes. He just throws in like some of the iconic music and then it's just over and back to regular music. And it's really, it's very noticeable in the second 2 movies.
Yeah, it's really just sort of variations on the main. It's not varied. There isn't a whole lot of depth. There aren't different beats for different characters. There aren't different beats for different types of scenes. It's basically the main theme. But I think that like overall the score is not of a terrific quality, but the main theme of Back to the Future theme itself, I mean, I put right up there. It's not John Williams quality, but I mean, I'll put the main theme right up there. And that theme plays so well in the right scenes, especially the climax of the film. I think it's right up there personally. I like the light sort of piano notes that
I like
that
those
play.
moments better where they're sprinkled out, those little they're not piano notes, but they're almost like chimes.
I don't know. What is what is that?
But I know what you're talking about. I like those notes. But again, that's also repeated numerous times throughout all 3 movies.
Yeah, they lean very heavily on the same things. And maybe that speaks to part of the simplicity of the films, of the plot. There aren't a lot of twists and turns. There's a lot of simplicity here, and we can talk about that better or worse. But the main theme, again, I think it's right up there. I think it's really good. Let's talk a little bit about some of the central items here. And I mean, we're still kind of talking about the first one, but we can definitely stretch it across the trilogy. I want to talk about the different time periods that we see. We have 3 different versions of the 80s. 2 of them are very similar. We have the 50s, we have the future, and we have the Old West. I have a couple thoughts on these different time periods and how these time periods are portrayed in the films. Harry, let's start with you. Any thoughts about, how we see the progression of time in these films and the different eras that are portrayed? Is there anything else going on underneath the surface here, or is it just, fun adventure?
If I'm stretching it across all 3 movies, is that what we want to do?
I mean, you can take it how you want. I mean, if we want to take the first one, it's the 80s versus the 50s. That might be the easiest way to go.
But I'll start with that. Like, let's just compare the 80s to the 50s. I mean, I think there's more depth in the first one when we talk about, I think there's some more cleverness to the story in Back to the Future 2. The original Back to the Future is a very simple story, but it's so tight and natural and it flows so well. When you're just talking about the different time periods, I mean, it's quite obvious. You could see how things are different with respect to, not just the technology or how people dress, those obvious things that you see, but, the relations between women and men, how men treat women. There's a lot going on there. But then when you also talk about the Old West or you talk about the future, you don't really get a lot of deviation from that. Because we're really only talking about Biff. Biff's really the only character you see, and he's an ass in all of them. So he's treating women exactly the same way as he'd treat in any time period. It doesn't matter. But I guess if you want to look at under the surface stuff, you could see the mistreatment of women, I think, is one of the main talking points you could see there. Because you have Marty's you only get a few brief scenes with his girlfriend, so it's really hard to talk about how, respectful he is to her. Because I even noted down here in the beginning of the original one, he's having a conversation with his girlfriend, and he's still, doing the double take right in front of her with his jaw to the ground when he sees other hot women pass by. And she has to pull his face back to get his attention back onto her. And that's, again, very demeaning characteristic of males. So there's not a lot of growth there, but you can see that even in the 50s, it was even worse. So, I mean, you get those kind of underlying themes. I'm not sure if that's kind of your question, because obviously then you have technology, you have race relations, black people not being able to vote, and they kind of poke fun at that. And the mayor's, Goldie, whatever his name is, he'll be the future mayor. So you see some progression there.
Yeah.
They kind of poke fun at some of those unfortunate realities in the past, right? They point them out.
Yeah, no, that's exactly my question for sure. Nathan, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think again, it's sort of a product of its own time. Even in the 80s when they're trying to make a little bit more social progress and, the idea of, political correctness was, pretty new at the time. A lot of the jokes were just that juxtaposition of look how much progress we've made from the 50s. And even though the 50s is like this weird caricature that it just seems like someone saw Grease and then it's like, okay, I want to make that the 50s now, right? And, I think certainly for a lot of the viewership of this movie who just would have been kids, the 50s is this weird alien world that you just don't get. And so I know as a kid, I bought a lot of that, but I think it's Goldie Wilson. Is that the character's name?
Goldie Wilson.
Yeah. And it's like a weird caricature of a black man in a way. It's not I don't know if I would say it's offensive necessarily, but
it wasn't 100% racist. It was just
no, but it
racist.
It certainly borders it. Sort of the other things glossing over the peeping Tom stuff and the whole date rape thing is still kind of not played as a joke, but it's whatever. So there's a lot of those social issues that for a comedy, they're kind of dark and sort of glossed over. Even the 80s becomes a caricature of itself in a way, which is weird because it's right at the end of the 80s. But I thought that the portrayal of the 50s, as I've gotten older, I've just seen the fakeness of it. I still love the movie to death, but it's it doesn't quite work as well for me as it did when I was younger.
Sorry, just to counter that, I think the story is so tight that the story is about he's trying to get, his dad and his mom together. And obviously he wants to see them together. He wants his dad to be a different person, more like he is, right? To respect his dad, because he didn't respect his dad in the original 80s. So I think that's really the core of the story.
Oh, no, I agree.
We find faults in our parents right now.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree with you, Harry. I just mean just sort of nitpicking the juxtaposition of the different time periods. If you want to get into Marty's core drivers, then yeah, a lot of this stuff, it's small. I only notice it just when I'm sitting trying to watch it a little more critically. Again, it's a credit of the movie that, the story is just tight enough that you can kind of gloss over. And it's not a movie about social commentary. No. It's a comedy adventure. And so certainly Marty's journey and how his relationship develops with his father, which I think again, the great thing about the writing is his core thing is just I need to live. I just want to live. So I don't think he has any intention of truly changing his father. If anything, towards the end of the movie, he's so shocked.
That comes at the end of the movie, right? I think
it does. And it was never, I don't think it was intention. In fact, if anything, he was just more surprised. He even says it too. And he's so surprised at the change in his father, then when he goes back, he's not really expecting any changes. But I just mean as far as comparing the time periods, I did that they're showing how what a weird world it is. Because when I think of 1985, that's not, I don't really feel that's very different from now. And we're just over more than 30 years from 1985. The worlds in the movie 85 and 55 are, it may as well be the 30s from 1985. I like the way that they played it, but certainly it's a little not as genuine when as you maybe get a little bit older.
Is there an indictment of either time period, though? I mean, either you find that they are critical of either time period versus the other.
I think they're making fun of the 50s a little bit, because they'll have the odd joke, like say the plutonium jokes, like, I'm sure plutonium is available in every corner drugstore. That's sort of like sort of making fun of the 50s and how they portrayed the future in the 50s, right? Like little jokes like that, the Ronald Reagan thing. So I don't know if it's necessarily an indictment. I mean, they're just poking fun at it.
Yeah,
but are they indicted?
I feel it's more just poking fun. This is a simple movie. The story's fairly simple, even though you're dealing with time travel. And it can get a bit convoluted in the end to explain it, for some people at least. Especially it gets a little bit more complicated in the second one. I think it's a fairly simple movie. I don't think there was really any other hidden messages or any other topics or themes they were really trying to, bring out onto the table.
I disagree. I think that they're poking fun at the 80s. They play up the 50s for comedy with the cafe, with the chocolate milk and the kids being how they are, the enchantment under the sea dance and all that BS. And there was that when Marty first arrives in the town square and there's that kid bouncing around on those pogo shoes and shit. They play up the 50s is kind of goofy, but when you get to the 80s, I find there's a lot of cynicism when we see bits of the 80s. When there's the XXX movie theater in the town square when Marty comes back to the future, you got Brett, the bum, sleeping on the bus stop, and just the town seems like it's a bit of a dump. You've got graffiti on certain things. It seems like it's not.
I agree with you if you were just talking about the jump from the 50s to Biff's altered future of the 80s.
Well, that's
then it's more sleazy.
Yeah, then it's more sleazy, but that's the alternate 1985, right? But even in the regular 1985, it seems to me like they're kind of making fun of it.
Like backdrop, though, they're not really trying to bring that out into focus.
I don't know. I mean, it seems to. I mean, you're right. It's in the backdrop, but it's like it's always in the backdrop. I mean, in one of my favorite lines in the movie when Doc Brown's like, "Well, who's president of the United States?" and Marty so confidently says, "Ronald Reagan," and he's such a joke to Doc Brown, like the actor, and he makes a whole joke about Ronald Reagan being president. He carries on for the next couple of scenes.
That's a joke against the 50s, not against the 80s.
I don't know, man.
I see what you're saying, Jeff, but I think that's like us looking back on.
Because it goes further, though, because Doc's he says, like Marty keeps saying his things. He said, keeps saying heavy, and Doc's like, what's wrong with the gravitational pull? Like the future must be a piece of shit. He talks about plutonium or whatever, or the radiation.
I don't know if
Doc is like, of course, the fallout from all the nuclear wars. Like this.
But that's not the paranoia of the 60s.
Yeah, no, I understand that that's paranoia of 1955. But I think it's played for humor. But if you were to look at the 1985 that's portrayed here, they're not saying like life's great in the 80s. I think they're saying that life was kind of cool in the 50s. Aside from, rapey teenage bullies, everything else was pretty solid. I think that's an interesting undertone to the film.
I didn't get that at all, but that's okay. It's good to have a different interpretation.
Did you?
I don't
watch?
Hey, man,
they're making jokes.
To disagree. That's
like,
fine.
Wherever you could get a joke, they went for it.
They did go for it, but okay, we could talk about whether it's a difference in time frame or if it's just a sign of the times. So Marty, and we'll talk about his relationship with his father from the 50s, the teenage George McFly. So, when Marty changes everything, unwittingly, right, he doesn't do it on purpose, comes back to the 80s and everything is different with his family. So the house, it's the same house, but everything's different. So it's been redecorated, so it doesn't look like it's from the 70s anymore. His brother's wearing a suit to the office as opposed to going to flip burgers. Sister has dudes chasing her. Parents are fit, non-alcoholics. Father's a successful writer. But I was interested, and I kind of have always been interested, what this says about the definition of happiness and the definition of success. So this seems to suggest that, and I found it most in his brother. It's like, Marty, I always wear a suit to the office. But it plays out amongst the other characters where the success is defined by success in career, money, and so on. So, Perry, what are your thoughts about that?
I agree with you on that point. It's just, I really don't think that was to me, it's not something that they're trying to, do a commentary on. It's not social commentary here. I think it's just we have spoiled rich people making movies, and they're saying happiness, subconsciously it's like, okay, they're just saying from the element of the story they had an unhappy family and things weren't going well for them or as well. And now with some change, what's happened on this little adventure, things are just better. And that you can look at it one way and saying, do I need money to be happy? Is that the commentary they're making? But that might be true. I don't think they're focusing on that commentary, but I just think it's just an outcome of their parents having also a more better relationship, that their kids are now better off for it. And unfortunately, when you're dealing with a 30-second time frame in a movie, how do you express that? The other brother, Jimmy, he was unemployed or working at McDonald's. Now he's working at an office and he's wearing a suit. So how do you express that? Okay, I'm wearing a suit. A sister who didn't have any good relationships, now she's got good relationships. Okay, and now Marty's got a car. So, I just look at it as simple as that. There are benefits of a couple who's more happily married. Now their kids are actually a bit more successful out of that, but I don't think they're making a commentary that I need to be rich to be happy.
Yeah, no, it's shorthand. I don't think they're making a commentary. I think it's subconscious underneath. This feels to me a product of like the Ronald Reagan America. It's not a conscious choice.
I'm not even sure if it's that. I think it's just as simple. I got 30 seconds to show you the change. Yeah. How best can I do it for the audience?
Yeah, what would make sense for everybody, right? Yeah, for sure. Nathan, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with Harry. They're just trying to portray it as quickly as possible because, they set up the family at the beginning of the movie. Jimmy Olsen is working at whatever deep fried chicken place. Sister's complaining about something. The mom is terrible. The dad's a loser. And then how do you just show it? Yeah, what we see at the end there. Although I do question, why is Jimmy wearing a suit and working at the office, but also living with his parents? Nowadays, that's maybe normal, but in the 80s...
And it's Saturday. Also, it's Saturday.
It's Saturday.
Oh,
it's Saturday.
Was it Saturday? Oh, okay.
It was Saturday.
He's working overtime.
That's American, man. You don't stop working. That's success.
That's a working idiot. I work overtime on the weekends. I don't know about you.
No, definitely not.
Oh, okay. No.
I work overtime on my Xbox on Saturday. The CPU on my Xbox is the only thing pulling overtime on Saturday mornings.
This is podcasting, Jeff. You've been counting money all your life.
Yeah.
You got City Mr. Brahman.
Harry, Harry, no, I think you're right. It's just they had to just portray this to the audience, like with no exposition. And then also kind of make it, and still be a little bit zippy and make a joke of it.
Yeah.
Right. Because again, the scene where he comes out of the bedroom and everything's changed. I mean, they've got like 5 jokes in there, like packed in there. And it's like a 60-second scene tops.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's quick. It's very efficient. And I mean, I agree with you guys. They are just trying to use some shorthand to show the differences, like the improvements in the time. Like everything's better now because George stood up for himself. But what I find interesting is that as a sign of the filmmakers, like that's what was going, and it is very effective. It does portray exactly what they want it to. I don't know. It's more a commentary on us that does work. They weren't trying to do any commentary there. I mean, this is more a meta thing on my perspective.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I think that most stands out with the truck, Marty's truck, unfortunately. Yeah. But the thing I most take away from this is that in the original timeline, you see George and both the mom and the dad are losers, but they're on the opposite ends of the table, not looking at each other, not talking to each other. She's just pining for the past. Mm-hmm. Just that glimmer of who he could have been in the past. And then now you see them in the future and they're together, hugging each other, holding hands, his arm around her. It's more about, the family dynamic and the relationship with the parents and how that impacts the children. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, and that's a good point, I think. That's a very stark contrast because they do not exchange any lines at the start. She's reminiscing about how they met and fell in love, and there's that glimmer in her eyes there, and he's just eating that giant bowl of peanut brittle, watching Jackie Gleason with that stupid goddamn laugh that he has. Yeah, they're a functional, loving couple. So you're right. I think that is the most important piece to the situation there. So that's a good observation. I hadn't really thought about that, but that makes a lot of sense. One question I do have is, obviously, they're successful. They have money. I got to ask, what the fuck has George McFly been doing for 30 years if this is his first novel? Anybody have an answer?
No, I think he may have been a writer the whole time because when you look at the end of the second movie, when the newspaper changes, Biff kills him in the 70s, I think. Yeah. And when the newspaper changes, it says local writer honored. He's probably a writer. That might just be his big novel or something like that. But he's probably just a writer the whole time. As to why he's got that money, I don't know.
Well, that's
maybe she's the one who's rich.
Yeah, maybe.
This again comes back to my point is if it was all materialistic, they wouldn't be in the same house.
also true.
They would have been in some luxurious house with luxurious cars. I mean, I think he was driving a Mercedes maybe or something like that, but regardless, they look still like moderately successful couple. And I think the building blocks, the difference really was in his confidence and their relationship. And then the kids just have better confidence and a better outcome in their lives.
Plus,
well, that's what they're
you're right at the end of the movie too. Yeah. Like to have him wake up and like it's the wrong house. I mean, like how you going to resolve that?
Yeah.
I think we've probably given it more thought than the writers have.
I think so too.
That's our job, to give it more thought. The people who made the fucking movie. That's what we do here on the show. All right. Let's transition a little bit here. I want to get into more Back to the Future Part 2. Let's just jump right in. The future of 2015. Let's go. Hoverboards, flying cars, self-drying jackets, Nike sneakers. Harry, I just want to hear your thoughts on their vision of the future from this is 2015 as envisioned in the late 80s.
Well, as I've said before, and I'll say again, the shoe. Oh, baby. Oh, golly. Oh, my.
Harry, are you a sneakerhead?
Oh, yeah. No. You might misunderstand what I'm talking about.
Oh, okay.
Elizabeth shoe.
Oh, Elizabeth shoe. I thought you were talking about those shoes.
You guys thought about the running shoes?
Yeah.
No. Elizabeth shoe. Before we start going into Back to the Future, I just wanted to point out that I think that the original one is just a really well thought out, tight movie that just flows so well. It's very simple. And then as we transition into Back to the Future 2, I think Back to the Future 2 has a bit more of an interesting story because they've kind of peeled back other layers with the science fiction and the time travel. And I really like that aspect of Back to the Future 2. What was your question?
Well, no, I mean, you bring up a good point. Like, well, we'll come back to it as well because it's tight. But yeah, no, I just wanted to talk about the future 2015 as envisioned here. And, any thoughts? It's probably a broad question, but, there's kind of a lot to break down with the future, even though it's only barely the first half.
What 2015 would have looked like?
Yeah, like what, obviously they were kind of going over the top, right? But, what are your thoughts about what we did see? Do you think that they were trying to make realistic predictions or if they were just being goofy, it's the future, and some of the things that we did see?
I think it's a mix of trying to predict the future, but also, being a bit flamboyant and over the top with the choices for entertainment as well. Flying cars is a stretch, but I mean, I remember in the 60s, they thought by, the year 1990 or 2000, we'd all be living on the moon. So these kind of, predictions, are hopeful predictions, right? We talked about Star Trek being hopeful. A writer who's writing this is saying, man, I hope we have progressed enough that we have flying cars. We should have flying cars by then. So I don't really think it was an over the top prediction. You're in the 80s, you're saying 20 years from now. Yeah, actually, now that I think about it, flying cars is probably still way too much of a stretch, but, hoverboards, definitely think that would be there. Holograms, I mean, VR's around now. It's not to the extent of Jaws 19. By the way, I wish Jaws 19 was here.
Really, really personal.
Yes. Shoelaces and the self-drying jacket and the inflatable jacket. I mean, that's all awesome. I wish, forget the shoes. I want my fucking hockey skates to just lace up by themselves. I hate putting my skates on.
That'd be sweet.
But I think everything else was pretty realistic to expect, in a sense. That's just me.
Within reason. Yeah. Nathan, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's just a common conceit of, movies from that era projecting out to the future. And yeah, maybe it's a little flamboyant, but, they're probably thinking, well, it's maybe they're trying to kind of keep it futuristic and realistic at the same time. And it's sort of a weird, line to walk. I hadn't seen this movie for quite a while. And when I was seeing this future, I thought, man, this is like a weird, mashup between Demolition Man and Batman Beyond. It was so weird seeing some of these clothes. People are wearing Faraday cages on their head. It's so strange. Yeah. The one thing I did like and I had a laugh at, because I'd sort of forgotten about it, was, well, I remember the Cafe 80s, but I think that's the one thing that they did it just as more of a joke, but it's also, they kind of predicted the future in a weird way with this nostalgia for the past. A nostalgia factor for, the good old days kind of thing. But I like the way it was played here for a joke. 2015, the 80s was a big thing. I mean, how many movies in the last 10 years have taken place in the 80s? I mean, at least a handful. There are parts of it though that are just almost too ridiculous. Let's throw in some bunch of hundreds of laser discs are being thrown out. I was like, well, this is future stuff now, right? The nostalgia in the store. What was the name of the store?
Oh man, I don't remember the name.
Yeah. Does it even have a name?
Sure. Yeah,
okay. But I mean, that's just all they're just kind of throwing away all that kind of that junk there, right? That no one ever really cared about anyways, and the weird joke about the dust cover and dust-free paper. It's it's kind of, some throwaway.
The weirdest prediction is they thought Wacko Jacko would still be black.
Oh, gee.
Well, it was his 80s version, though, dude.
Yeah.
This was
It doesn't matter.
this was 80.
If you were smart,
it was
you'd predict
89 though.
he would have become white.
In 89, what did Michael Jackson look like?
He was still fairly black in
Was he?
89, I think.
Okay. Anyways. I also did like the kind of that video game again, like sort of that weird nostalgia thing where like mini games now, sort of the graphical look of the 80s as well. That's a huge thing now with games. And so having that arcade game there was, I thought, kind of a neat touch.
Well, yeah, but what's interesting is that like in the 50s, it was a cafe. In the 80s, it's like a workout parlor. And in 2015, it's both. Because they got people on those bikes in 2015, right? They're in the cafe on bikes.
Out of curiosity, what was your favorite or most interesting 2015 invention? Doesn't have to the one that didn't come true. It's just what do you think is? Forget the flying cars. So let's take the flying cars out of the picture, or the boots or the jacket.
I think that was going to be it, but okay.
No flying cars, no shoes, no jackets, no hoverboard. There's all these other little things that you've seen.
Automated serving. The automated serving in the Cafe 80s. It's basically robot servers in a way, because there are like the TV comes up and the Max Headroom ripoff. You order from that, they can give you your drink. There's one shot, and it's very brief, where like that one of those TVs is going down the road to some of the booths where presumably you can order, and somehow you're going to get your food and drink. I thought that was actually kind of interesting because like I kind of want to see that right now.
All right, so Harry, let me get this straight. You want me to choose my favorite invention from Back to the Future 2, but I can't choose flying cars, hoverboards, self-drying sizing jackets, or self-lacing light-up shoes?
Because those are the obvious ones.
Okay, well, then give me a Pepsi, I guess.
Oh, and actually, I want to change my answer. I want the vest that Griff's crony was wearing.
What about that baseball bat that it just grows bigger and bigger and bigger?
Oh, what the fuck is that used for? Like future baseball? Is that how the Cubs won?
Murder ball. That's how the Cubs won. Yeah, exactly.
Death ball. That's probably what it's called now. What about that plant thing when they go to the house? You see, like, this whole, like, kind of like garden is like...
Oh, and the thing descends from the ceiling?
Yeah, exactly. It descends from the ceiling, and it's a bunch of plants growing there. What the fuck was that? I thought that was...
That's weird. That's like an odd salad bar, but I also think of, like, the infrastructure of the house, because it's quite tall, so what's above that kitchen there? Horticulture,
it tracks up into the master bedroom, so, like, late at night, you can have the fruit, get the grapes and stuff.
Well, Harry, what would be yours then?
The plant thing. I was like, what the fuck is that?
Definitely.
I just meant, like, not your favorite. What's the one that stood out most interesting for you?
I thought the weather control service or whatever
that was interesting.
Was fascinating. Also, which in the technology exists if they wanted to do it where you could pay by using your thumbprint.
Yeah, that's not far off. They also had the thumbprint door as they brought.
Yeah, the thumbprint door was there. Yeah.
And then what happens when the power goes out?
Well, you're fucked.
Get out of your house. You're
crawling. Yeah, you're crawling in through the window at that point, which is still the same window from 1985, basically.
Also, they predicted that we still have faxes, although now you have a fax in each room.
That's true. Yeah, and at least it was a small fax machine. Fax machines aren't that small. I did think it was some of the things that were interesting when we get back to the McFly residence. The big flat screen TV that you hang on the wall. I mean, that was not something that they had in 1989. What's that?
Brett had it. Tango and Cash. Brett.
Right. That's the thing that everybody's got a TV that just hangs on the wall now, right? Multiple channels. That's also a possibility. So some of those things in the house or video calls. I mean, that's long been a trope of science fiction, but that's, so those are some of the things where they kind of came a little bit closer to reality, which I thought was kind of interesting.
VR, they're wearing like Oculus Rift headgear when they're eating dinner.
I mean, not quite there, but that's not that far off. I mean, the hydrated pizza is, I don't know why anybody, was the pizza too big? You can't bring a fucking pizza over to the house. You got to have a small freeze-dried pizza. I mean, come on, shit. What's your favorite invention, though?
Well, the favorite would be definitely the flying cars, but I said we can't choose the obvious one.
No, but now that we've chosen the non-obvious ones, what's your...
Flying cars?
What's the one
I'd want that.
All right.
Hoverboard, I think.
Yeah, I think I'm on the hoverboard as well. I mean, flying car, but that's about 5 seconds before we're all dead in a smoking heap.
Well, see, the way I figure is that I would just, like McFly style, just hang on to Harry's flying car. Something goes wrong. I'm on the hoverboard. I'm going to be okay. I can just, float down. Yeah. Sorry, Harry.
No, that's quite all right. Feel free to hang on.
Yeah, he's like, no,
I just meant, I'm sorry. I couldn't save you crashing your flying car.
That's quite all right.
So let's move along. Okay, so we've talked a bit about the future here. Everything works out hunky-dory. At least it seems that way. We come back to the alternate 1985. All we see is Hill Valley, obviously, which is a cesspool, gang violence, toxic waste, pollution, gambling, prostitution, everything that Republicans fear is just around the corner because of immigrants is 1985 alternate year. So I don't know. I mean, was this over the top? You know, does this kind of, you know, because this is basically designed to be Biff Tannen, unregulated, unfettered. You know, Harry, what did you think of the alternate 1985?
Someone can point to the obvious, this is Trump's America now, right? But that's obviously not the point. I feel this is more of a localized problem. Even though he's made a lot of money, I don't think you could see in the news, I don't think he really impacted a lot of America. It just looks like he's just transformed this town into the sleaze fest that he likes. You could look at it now, it's a commentary on American greed and what it can translate into, I guess. But it's more just like, you know, you have a loser who's, you know, got a ton of money. What is he going to do? He's going to turn it into this, right? White trash bullshit. I guess it's part commentary, but I mean, it's just so focused on just the relationship between Biff and the McFlys. There's not a lot of focus on any of the other aspects of, you know, society. Mm-hmm. That's just what I took at it. I love this aspect of the movie, though, because it's not really that everything went to hell because Biff's now rich and he's manipulated everything and he's killed George McFly, he's married mom. I just love the time travel aspect of it, because when I was young, it was a bit confusing, especially with old Biff, because I always got confused when I was young, when I saw old Biff go and he comes back and then he's kind of injured and sick. Mm-hmm. And you don't realize at that point that since he came back, now he's died. He can't exist in that timeline. I always found that kind of odd, like it never really lingered on that. So you're making a stretch to assume he just kind of vanished. I mean, is that true? I'm assuming that's what happened.
Well, there is actually a deleted scene where he starts to vanish at the end there. After he comes back, yeah.
So that's what I assumed is happening now as you watch it when you're older. And I remember when I was young, I was saying, what the fuck? Did he just get out of the car wrong? Is he having gas? Like, what the fuck? What's going on?
Well, he's an older guy. I mean, the stress of time travel caused the heart attack. I mean, there's any number of explanations for what's happening to him when he gets back.
But just to say this, it's a bit of a stretch that this old man who was a dummy his whole life is able to operate the DeLorean and knows what's going on. I know you can get a hint, it's a time machine, but how to operate that. So that's a big stretch for me.
Yeah, to kind of luck into it. I mean,
not just luck into getting it and finding it, but
because it's so specific how to operate it, right? Like inputting the time, going to 88 miles an hour. There's got to be fuel and Mr. Fusion and the whole thing. But yeah, you're right. It's a bit of a stretch, but I guess necessary for plots. I think I agree. This is the most science fiction-y aspect here. Is the alternate 1985, where especially when Doc kind of draws out it's
the parallel timeline. Right? This is what happened with Triple 9.
It's called Flashpoint, guys. It's called Flashpoint.
No, but this was the most interesting part I think it could be my favorite part of the entire trilogy. This dynamic that's happening here.
Yeah, it's up there for me, for sure. Yeah, Nathan, what are your thoughts on 1985A?
From a science fiction standpoint, it's pretty cool to see this. I kind of agree that the idea that Biff was able to pull this off, definitely stretching it a bit, and it's where the movie starts kind of falling apart for me. The aspect of going to this alternate 1985, I kind of wish we spent maybe a little more time in this world. I always did kind of find it strange, though, that he was able to transform this town. For me, it's kind of like, someone in Carstairs got rich and turned Carstairs into this hellhole or something like that. It's like, you'd go somewhere else.
Fort McMurray, Hell's Angels.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, not okay. That's a little different, though. But
it's already a hellhole, Harry.
Yeah. Or you mean like before or after it burned down? I'm not sure. But I mean, I just thought that he would just go someplace else. I guess there was no real reason to linger in this world, but just introducing the idea and then drawing it out. I mean, sort of when I was younger, I was like, I ate this up. It's like dark and weird, and it's a little scary at times. I did also appreciate that they got all of Biff's flunkies back as well, and they're their older selves as well. It's all the same three actors.
Billy Zane.
Yeah,
Billy Zane. And
he got lines in this one too. Good for him.
Does he?
Yeah. Very briefly.
Yeah. It's like 2 lines as opposed to 0 in the first.
Oh, you mean right outside the hotel when they catch him that first time?
We'll take the easy way.
But this is kind of the part of the movie, though, where things break down for me a little bit, because we've already had a couple of throwbacks to the first movie, right? With the hoverboard chase scene, everything like that. It's like, okay, to me, that's fine, because we're going to have this part of the movie. It's going to tidy up. We're going to have a callback, and that's okay. But then we still have more and more callbacks. When he wakes up, it's the mom callback.
Yeah, and I agree.
And
I hate it started to get a little trying to me, all the callbacks.
Yes.
And it just repeats itself pretty much in the third one, too.
Oh, yeah. Well, boy, we'll get into that. To me, this is like where I'll say it, the movie starts to become lazy, in its writing. And, I kind of wonder if part of that was because Zemeckis was initially not interested in doing a sequel. Is it Bob Gale? Is that the writer? Did he come? He did all three as well.
Yeah. They were both, because they own the rights, so they both did all three.
That's right. Yeah. So I feel though that like this is where it starts to show that their heart is really not in it. Although again, like I'll say that Thomas Wilson's alternate 1985 guy, like where he's even more mean than the guy who we first met in the first movie. Like we kind of have some fun. Thankfully, we don't linger here too long. I think it was just enough for what we had. If it was just going to be Marty and Doc just kind of getting into some hijinks with this Biff, that would have drove me nuts. I mean, the science fiction-y part I'd like, but there wasn't really enough of that for me.
See, I kind of agree and disagree. I agree with you, Nathan, on all the callbacks. It gets too much. As we mentioned, and we'll probably talk about again, the third one, it just keeps repeating itself over and over again. Waking up with the mom and the chases at the beginning with Biff and all the manure and all these kind of things. And it happens at the end of this movie too. But what I loved how he had to go back again into the past and keep avoiding himself from the events of the first movie after the future. And I loved all the science fiction aspect to it. It got complicated, but not overly complicated. It was just fun, and I felt it was still pretty tight. Him going back in the past to get the almanac after escaping from the future. I love that aspect.
Okay. I do like parts of it, but I'm going to bet that I'm going to be the sole dissenter on the second half of this movie, because I think, Jeff, I know your opinion on it, but I will say that like there's parts of it that I did like, but we can get into a little bit more, but I'm not sure that it necessarily worked for me.
Yeah, you will be the dissenter here because I love the second half of the movie. I love the first half of the movie, but I just thought it was really interesting. I mean, I love the alternate 1985. I mean, the Thomas Wilson as the ultra mean, powerful Biff. He did such a fantastic job. He's such a horrible antagonist. Like, they've got to stop this guy to go back, we got to go back in time. And we're playing with what we already kind of saw. So we get to see different aspects of the scenes. And Harry, like you said, some of the science fiction aspects, he's got to avoid himself while still making sure events play out.
Yeah, I love that.
As they did. Yeah. Oh, man, that's such a great idea. And I mean, it's played for comedy. It's great. The physicality of it where he's trying to get the almanac back. And Biff's got that stupid girly magazine. He puts the dust jacket of the almanac over to cover it up. And I mean, all of that, I thought it was very tight. Very, very well shot, well edited there. And, Marty, he gets it, he loses it, he gets it. Like, they just keep building the tension. And I thought that was one thing was very consistent with the first movie where they keep amping up the tension. They keep layering on other problems. Like, we solved this, this went wrong, and then this went wrong, and then this went wrong. And it's the same thing here. And I thought it was just great. I mean, they did a great job with the second half of this movie. It's cool how they kind of, they edited in the stuff from the first one, and it all fits very organically. I thought they did a really good job here. That was great.
At the end. I love at the end when he goes back in time and Doc Brown's happy, like you see in the first one, and then Marty comes running around the corner again. I just came back again.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up in a bit, but yeah, for sure. I mean, they did such a good job there because we didn't really talk about the finale of the first one, and we should have, where, he's driving the DeLorean towards the power line or whatever, waiting for the light to strike. I mean, that was such a great finale in the first one, and they bring it back here, and we're seeing the same thing, and it all happens, and then they cut it cleverly, and Doc is cheering in the streets there, and this is why I love the score, is because they cut the music just perfect as he shoots around the corner and sprints down the street. And Michael J. Fox has such a great, physical performance there as he's sprinting down the street, and the interplay there. I mean, man, that was so well done.
I think the music at that point I agree with, because it's a bit of a fast pace as he cuts, like it's a somber finale in the first one, and then we have the action again. But if you want to talk about the soundtrack again, it's an exact duplication of the first movie.
It's the same exact music, but
the thing is, there's no variation to anything.
No, but that's fine.
All the same.
But that's fine, because in that moment, they chose the exact right moment to cut the score in. Like, the main theme has a few beats to it, and there's different, like the main theme stretches out, right? It has its ups and downs to it, but they cut the main theme at the exact right moment where it's a little somber, but starts to build just as he's darting around the corner there. I mean,
it's a good moment, but it doesn't make a soundtrack.
But it doesn't make a soundtrack, but the soundtrack made that scene.
Well, yeah, it's a chicken in the egg, Will. Chicken in the egg.
No, but that's what I mean. Like, you're right. That doesn't make the soundtrack, but the soundtrack's there to make the movie. And at that, like Back to the Future 2, like that moment right there.
It's an okay moment. It's not good enough. The soundtrack is not good enough here.
That's a great moment. That's a fantastic moment.
Anyways, the soundtrack's only one aspect of a movie.
Anyway, I don't even remember where we were.
At the end of the movie.
Oh, yeah, I guess we were at the end of the movie. So I guess we've talked about it a little bit. It was so as we come to the end of part 2, was it too gimmicky? Was it just a rehash? Or is there more going on here?
I don't know. It's somewhere in between, I think, because I think, they wanted to do this movie where they didn't want to do it. And then it's like, okay, we'll do it. We've got some ideas. But then they had so many callbacks. They're leaning on it too much. It's weird because for all the stuff that happened in the second half of the movie, from when they go back to the 50s up until they're trying to get the almanac back, I mean, none of that worked for me. I think rewatching this, and again, I had not seen this for probably a while. I mean, the movie worked a little bit less for me than how I remembered it. Still watchable for me, is still enjoy it. I think all the performances are very strong. I'm a little on the fence about it.
Yeah. Harry, what do you think?
Not as tight as the first one, but I thought it was clever. I like, as we talked about, I like the science fiction element here and that extra layer of complication. Actually, except for seeing the future technology, like when he first arrives and he sees his hometown transformed in the future, I love that aspect, and seeing the flying cars, the jacket, the shoes, the hoverboard, all that stuff. The holograms. I hated all the callbacks, as Nathan said, because you're going with another Chase again, even though he's substituting himself in for his son. And I hated the scene with the Griff, who's now Biff's son or something like that, or nephew or whatever it is. And that whole repetition, I hated all that aspect. It's terrible. I'm glad they didn't linger on that too long, because I loved they stepped up their game after that. Loved the future stuff with Future Biff when they went back with the almanac complication and going back in the past. I loved all that stuff. So I thought it was very, very tight. I actually want to ask you guys, the movie ends with the ultimate spoiler trailer.
Yeah, totally.
As it kind of gives away, 15% of the third movie right there. What did you guys think of that? This is unheard of.
Oh, it's definitely an odd marketing choice. And you're right, they do show, there's no dialogue in it, but they definitely show like pretty much the very end of the movie. And it's strange because it seems as though that they have when they have shot the entire movie at that point as well.
And they reveal everything is okay. I wrote this down. They reveal everything will be okay in the end.
Yeah, I knew this was coming. Like, I remember that they had like the little tiny preview or whatever, but I thought it was just, just wacky Old West hijinks, but they literally show the end of the movie. Yeah, exactly. That shows that, everything's okay. It's crazy. It's one thing to have like a little tiny preview at the end of the second Matrix or whatever. But I mean, that's just like, just like a nonsense teaser. A little bit ahead of its time, though, in a way, like kind of showing that, preview coming up.
Well, I remember back in the time, like especially after Superman 2, they said Superman 3 coming soon, or James Bond is coming again, or will return again, and things like that. But this is an actual...
With the title of the movie, I seem to recall.
This is an actual spoiler trailer. Ridiculous. It's crazy.
Yeah.
So this is a little piece of trivia for you guys. You have one person to blame for this. Robert Zemeckis, the director. I don't know if you guys remember back the little art house film with Tom Hanks called Castaway, also directed by Robert Zemeckis. You guys remember the trailer for that movie?
Yes.
The ending.
Shows him. It does show the end. It shows him like his thin self with the package or whatever, right?
Yeah, well, it shows him. Like in that trailer, it shows him after he cuts home. Yeah. Talking with Helen Hunt, his fiance or his
that's
girlfriend.
right, yeah.
I remember trailers spoiling everything anyways. Like if you
Robert Zemeckis, it's Zemeckis' influence. It's not that he wants to spoil the ending. He doesn't like the idea for some reason that it's a surprise what's going to happen. He wants everything to kind of be on the table and to be able to enjoy the movie anyway. That's Robert Zemeckis. He said as much.
That's fine. But I'm kind of interested in the fact that this was attached to the end of this movie.
Well,
it's one thing having a trailer by itself. This is like right at the end of the movie. Question I have, the reason why I'm asking is, does this rob the ending of this movie of any of its mystery or cliffhanger? Like it's mystique. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think absolutely it does. But that, again, that's Robert Zemeckis' influence. He doesn't want to leave you hanging like that. He doesn't like it.
We should just call him Rick McCallum.
Oh, Rick McCallum. I mean, I'd rather call Rick McCallum Beelzebub, but, the fuck's that guy ever done? I mean, Jesus Christ.
I found that. Anyway. I just found that shocking. I completely forgot about it.
It is shocking. It's very odd that they did it. That is what they did. So Just before we move on to part 3, real quick, I don't want to say the moral of the story from Back to the Future versus Back to the Future Part 2, where Back to the Future Part 1, he's not trying to fuck anything up. Like, he's just trying to, like, he goes back and inadvertently fucks everything up and tries to fix it. And in the course of doing so, makes everything better. You know, Back to the Future 2, they're trying to set things, right. Like he didn't mean to fuck anything up, but he was knowingly trying to change the future with the idea of taking the almanac back.
Well, there's a lot of inconsistencies here, and this starts with Doc Brown. You get the sense from him that he says, well, Marty, I can't tell you too much about your future, but he's saying, I got to help you save your kids. You should just let bygones be bygones. Because he's also hesitant to tell Marty he's going to get into an accident.
Right.
And part 3. So there's inconsistencies there within the story and with what's driving Doc Brown. In addition, Doc Brown doesn't give a flying shit about the Prime Directive because he flies in on his fucking flying DeLorean in the middle of the street at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah, that's right.
Back to the Future Part 1 in the middle of the day and the beginning of the part 2, which is the same thing, same scene. But you would think he'd be a little bit more, he'd hide the fact that he'd have a
little more discreet,
a little more discreet. Yeah. He's like, why are you coming in the broad daylight here? And the problem here is this type of movie, the filmmakers, it's not the focus. There's a lot of inconsistencies here because it's just a kind of a simple adventure with a sprinkle of science fiction.
Yeah, well, they didn't expect to make a sequel, right? So when they ended Back to the Future Part 1, they were just kind of trying to do a sort of a fun cap on the end. And then when they make it a sequel, they had to make it consistent with how it opened because the movie's not about really anything that transpires from the opening, right? Where it's like, well, it's your kids. Something's got to be done about your kids. The movie's not about the kids, right? It's about everything that comes after that. So they were just they were shackled to that because that's how they ended the first one without consideration for a sequel.
You're right. It's just that there's still inconsistencies with the character. You're not being consistent. Doc Brown is a very inconsistent scientist.
Also, don't forget that suitcase full of money from the past. So that sort of implies that if he hadn't already, then he was going to just travel around the past and just, gallivant around, which again is shown to be a dangerous thing to do, inadvertently making changes. And yet he's all that money from like 10 different time periods.
But I think he was doing that to observe. And in order to observe, he'd probably have to go buy some clothes. He needed the money, right?
Well, no, I understand the practicality of it, but like just the idea, because by the time they're about to go back, he's like, I'm going to, destroy the time machine. He's so distraught over this altered in 1985. It's like any inadvertent changes, right? Like even the gambling thing, you would think that that's a fairly innocuous thing to do. And it's also would only be affecting a future because then later he's talking about, the future is not written. Well, that you can make a few bucks then on the side. It would be okay for Marty to probably do it. But yeah, there's sort of those weird things that they only really kind of come up with it for a scene, right? He doesn't tell him about the accident, but he wants to help him with the kids and so on and so forth. It's just whatever serves the scene at the time.
Yeah, and then as mentioned, this is, the filmmakers and writers are not really focused on making a consistent story, and that's why the first one is the most tight storytelling because everything is accidental. There's no, you're not trying to do something on purpose here.
Right.
The characters aren't really trying to do anything. They're thrown into a unfortunate situation and now they got to get themselves out of it in the best of circumstances.
Right. It's not Looper. That's what we're saying.
Yeah. No. Which is why your garden variety scientist is more desirable than your mad scientist. But so let's open into Back to the Future Part 3. I really like the opening scenes with Marty, like back in 1955 Doc, and they have to like repair the time machine with the 1950s components. I thought this was, again, like from the start where, Marty comes running down the street to, he's trying to explain to Doc everything that's happened here. Again, there's sort of some science fiction stuff here where, like Doc he's already watched the climax of the movie and now it's like, oh shit, stuff's just got turned up to 11. I like the interplay here where Marty's back in that situation with 1955 Doc Brown. I thought that was pretty cool. I really like the first act of Part 3 here. Nathan, what are your thoughts?
I don't know. It's okay. I mean, for me, it's a little weak in a way. I did sort of like the idea of trying to repair the time machine with 1955 parts. I think there's kind of something kind of cool there with, trying to replicate future technology with the technology you have on hand. I mean, the interplay between the actors is still really great, but it's just a really means to an end, right? We're just kind of setting up like what the rest of the movie is going to be. So nothing of particular consequence is really happening here. I would almost like to see a movie not necessarily a Back to the Future type of movie, but like a movie of trying to jury rig like, you know, future technology with your current technology, but, you know, you're working with 50s technology, because I sort of like that aesthetic of, you know, vacuum tubes and, you know, junk like that. I think that's kind of a neat idea.
Transparent aluminum.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hello, computer.
Good callback, Harry. So, Harry, what do you think here about the opening back in 1955?
I'm leaning more with Nathan. It's kind of just not really that impressed. I mean, it's okay. You know, it's kind of a cheat anyways, because they don't really focus on how they fix it. They just say they fix it because the future Doc, who's now stuck in the past, is giving the 1950s Doc Brown the instructions.
Well, they don't say how they built it in the first fucking place either. So how to repair it.
But at least in the first one, you had a little bit of an explanation, even though it was a few short scenes about what the fuck is this, the flux capacitor. They're not really saying how it works, but at least you're talking about the tech. You have some technobabble. Here, it's just like, it's happening in the background while the Doc's kind of, you know, admiring the fact that he's stuck in the past. Talking about Jules Verne and these kind of things. They were okay scenes. The chemistry's still there between the actors, but I feel a sense of repetition from the first movie being done here again, like with him in his home and setting up models. And I think they set up a model here again or something. I'm not sure. I can't remember, but it just feels like a redo of the first movie. And I think the rest of the movie feels like that too once we get to the Old West.
I just kind of want to talk about generally the Old West setting of Back to the Future 3. This is obviously, you know, pretty different than what we've seen before. We're going back, way back in the past. I mean, obviously, we're not there. There's lots of legends of the Old West, but how did the setting play for you guys as far as being the Old West? Did this feel authentic? Was it a little over the top? Harry, what are your thoughts there?
Bit of a mixed bag. You know, I'd lean more towards over the top than authentic. I mean, I think you're dealing with practical sets, but I just feel that the small town didn't have a lot of high quality sets built there. I mean, there were sets, there were buildings. It just felt a little on the cheap, if you ask me. What really bugs me is more of the small universe feel that we've talked about in other franchises that, you know, again, it's a repetition of everything. Biff's ancestors are there. Marty's ancestors are there. They're all prominent figures, and everybody, you know, Strickland is there again, and, you know, everybody's kind of the same. It's the same character. That's the joke. You know, that could be, one could say that's the charm of these movies. It doesn't work for me. It's just too repetitive. I'm not a fan of that at all. And the Old West, I don't know what they could have done because they went into the future. What else you could have done?
Yeah.
I mean, you can go further back in the past and maybe they fight dinosaurs. I don't know.
Yeah, what point of the movie
do, you know?
Yes. Yeah, that's what they should have done.
You're kind of stuck with your time period because you did the future, you did the 50s. I mean, where are you really going to go? Old West seems like a logical step to take, but at this point, be honest with you, it's franchise fatigue for me. It's not strong here.
Okay. Yeah, no, fair enough. I mean, yeah, it's tough. Like, what time period do you choose? You know, you've done the 50s, you've done the future, you get your present time in the 80s. Like, what do you, if you're going to go further back in the past, then, it's tough to say what you would choose. Nate, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, the setting, I mean, I kind of said it with first two movies. I mean, the setting of 1955 is like somebody watched Grease and said, we'll do that. And this is movie Old West for sure, through and through. I mean, there's nothing, it's as authentic as a spaghetti Western. And so you kind of accept it as sort of movie logic. I don't know where else you could go. I mean, you're talking about California. So, I mean, like for a frontier town, like going back even further, but yet sort of try and keep with these characters and stuff. So they're trying to go in these weird, like repetitive circular motions of, you know, and that is the joke. I think they wanted to try and juxtapose like going to the future. Like, okay, now we're going way back to the past because they're still staying within lifetimes that, you know, people they know are still there. This is, again, like where it's kind of lazy that they're doing the exact same thing. You have, you know, Tannen show up and he's got his flunkies and he's harassing McFly and all the other sort of jokes that are in there. And they do the exact same scene again, like in the saloon, right? We've done this. And then they put a little twist on it. He wakes up and he sees his mom, but it's not his mom. You know, little things like that. And, you know, I don't know why Michael J. Fox has to like play all these parts. Like, you know, in the second one, I mean, it was out of control. And then this one, it's like, okay, we're doing this again. Come on now.
And not just that, you have the repetition of the love story. Like the main MacGuffin here is, in the first one, it was about parents. Then it's about his family and kind of him and his wife. And here you have Doc Brown and his love interest. And that kind of, part of the side story here. So it's just a repetition of everything. I just don't find anything new here except for the setting.
Yeah, the only thing that really, again, that saves it is just the performances are engaging enough that it's like I can make it through these scenes. And that's just going to kind of carry us through the rest of the movie, I feel.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously the performances have carried us this far. I see what you guys are saying. I mean, obviously we are repeating ourselves. This is the third repetition. I don't know if it's lazy or, it's kind of like Star Wars where we have sort of rhyming stanzas.
Though, this is the exact same thing.
Well, it's the exact same thing in Star Wars.
This is the problem. It's like invading.
The execution is way different here than Star Wars. Like if you're talking about.
No, the execution is different, but it is extremely deliberate here. I don't know if I'd call it. I get you. I mean, you could call it lazy. I mean, that's one opinion, but it is a very deliberate repetition. Whether it's lazy or it's just like, well, we can't think of anything else to do, so we'll do this, or if it's by design, because there is a commentary on destiny here.
You could go down that road, but this just feels cash grab.
I don't know. I mean, they did do a great job of cash grab because each of these films was significantly less successful.
That's not an excuse for their intention. If I've got nothing new to say here, why am I making this movie? If they really wanted to talk about the sins of the father or destiny, well, I think they would have talked about that or lingered on those themes a little bit more.
Maybe they would have if it was a more serious type of film, but it's not. Like it is.
Those thematic points are moot.
I don't think that they're moot because then you're bringing it back around where now those themes start to visit themselves on Doc. Like Marty has kind of fulfilled his destiny and his next job is to pass that on to Doc Brown because part 3 visited the McFly family. Like nothing's happening with the McFlys in part 3. Like we see them, that story effectively has concluded, and now we're on to Doc. We're taking care of Doc in this one. So yeah, some of those themes are coming around to him, and it's not handled as well, but I mean, I don't know, that we're struggling with a different thing here. And the one scene that I think really works for that is the night before, and like they've got the DeLorean all rigged up on the rails there. And Doc is like, I'm not coming back. Like, I'm staying here. I'm in love with Clara. And Marty's like, you don't belong here. Tell me you're a scientist. Tell me what's right, in here, right? In your head. I like that reversal where, like, Marty's learned from Doc, but Doc has also learned from Marty and his passion. I don't know that it's all worked out all that well, the fabric of the movie, but I think that emotional transference there really worked for me. I thought that was a really touching moment, and because the performance is like that, that's what makes part 3 work, is the emotional core.
See, that's great. It's a great point, and I agree with you. It's a great moment, and I like that transposition of those character beats. He's thinking more scientifically. Doc's thinking more with his heart. Great stuff. That's a 2-minute scene. Now, you could develop an entirely different story which does not riff on the previous 2 movies. Do a different story and still talk about those thematic points. They don't do that here. That's a 2-minute scene in a movie filled with riffing what came before. And that's what I take from.
I don't know that I agree with that exactly. But let's let Nathan weigh in before we roll on to that.
I'm a little somewhere in between. I mean, Jeff, I agree with you. For me, that scene works. I wish, and I think that idea is a solid idea. I wish they had done that for the rest of the movie.
Exactly.
And the riffing probably would have been a little bit more acceptable if I felt that was the theme of the movie. Because that scene actually doesn't come till way later in the movie.
Yeah, you're almost
so we haven't had that
the last
dynamic.
20 minutes of the movie.
Yeah, that's at the start of the third act or the end of the second. But even before that, when he rescues her from falling into the ravine, when they realize that she was in effect meant to fall in there, right?
True, but again, that's just it's like a small moment that they don't capitalize on.
Well, what else were they going to do with that?
Great little. Well, I mean, I don't know. I'm not a writer, but I mean, I just sort of think that they had a strong idea, and this was. The frustrating thing for me in the second one as well is a solid idea here that I wish they would capitalize on. And, and when I say that they're lazy, I'm not saying that they're like, fuck, whatever, we're just going to crank it out and we're just going to do this. We're sort of put in a position where like, okay, well, we didn't intend to do this. You see this with some sequels that just don't work. Sometimes it's, the execution's bad, but sometimes the passion of the filmmakers is not really there. I mean, they're professionals. They show up and they're, trying to do the job, and all the actors are, none of the actors are slacking off. And I don't think Zemeckis is necessarily slacking off. I'm sure they all thought this was a great idea, but it didn't work. In a way, I think that the fact that the third movie came out so close to the second one is a little bit of a detriment, because they maybe could have, if they had had time to reflect on the second movie, they could have seen, okay, we can just should just do something different with the third one. Keep it in the Old West. The setting is fine, I think. And if the joke of the series is like the first 10 minutes or 15 minutes, you're just going to riff on the earlier ones. Okay, fine. It's a comedy. Do that. But then I sort of wish that we'd had the reversal of the role. Marty being the logical one. It would have been actually interesting, like right at the start, like Doc's like, I'm not going back. I mean, you'd have to sort of you'd have to maybe change the reason as to why Marty goes back in the first place. I don't know, whatever. But if earlier on Doc is like, I don't care, I'm not leaving her, then there's more stakes at the movie. That was the other problem with the movie. There's like, other than him getting shot, and he's not going to get killed, not a lot of stakes in the movie. Whereas in the first movie, it's not a serious movie, it's a comedy, but I feel real stakes to it. And this, that's just not present. Yeah. So again, like Jeff, I agree with you on a lot of stuff, but I mean, I'm kind of leaning more towards Harry, where they just didn't really capitalize on a lot of these ideas that I think are really good.
God damn it.
Sorry, man.
No, I mean, yeah, you're right.
This is a difference of opinion. I mean, I'm not even saying that it's necessarily even like terrible, but it's just like, for me, like some of those flaws maybe kind of overpower like some of those ideas that you're talking about.
No, Jeff. Sorry to pounce on your childhood love, but the movie is not good.
I will say, I actually, in the rewatch, I think I like the third one a little bit more than the second one. In the past, it was always the other way around. But like rewatching it recently, I was like, I kind of enjoyed the third one maybe just a little bit more. I don't know. Seeing another movie right before I watched the third one, maybe I was just on a high after that. I don't know. So
I think the third one, just taken on its own, I think the third one, like if you were to forget about everything else, I think the third one has a better structure and flow to it than the second one. The second one is kind of disjointed because like they have to deal with the end of part one where they never expected to. And so they got to do some clunky things. They got to put Jennifer to sleep and throw her on a bench, and they got to do some goofy stuff before they get to the meat. Like Part 2 doesn't really start until Act 2. The first act in the future is just a throwaway. Where Back to the Future 3, the whole movie is a little bit more cohesive. So I feel that that's what you're sensing there. I mean, I understand like Part 3 is not exactly the well-loved iteration of the series here, but I think that there's more going on here. I really like the relationship between Christopher Lloyd and Mary Steenburgen, however you want to pronounce her name. They have good chemistry.
There's nothing there, man. I mean, it's not that there's a lack of chemistry. It's just it is so superficial. There is nothing of value I see here. It's just...
No, I totally disagree here. They connect over...
That's just Jules Harry's Verne cold, dead heart coming out.
Yeah, it's cold, mechanical hearts.
I like Jules Verne. So do I. Oh, my God.
Yeah, but that's great. Every relationship in the series...
But there's nothing more than that, man. And they don't...
No, but nothing's more... No relationship more in the whole series. It's all sold on chemistry and the performance. There's nothing more to their relationship than there is to Marty and Doc's relationship. There's nothing less.
There's nothing much there. Right? But there's no focus on that relationship at all.
But there's no focus on anybody's relationship.
It's on this relationship. It's not that there's a lack of chemistry between the actors. It's Mary Steenburgen or Burgeon or whatever. She does an okay job, and Christopher Lloyd does a good job. It's not that I don't buy the relationship. It's just I guess he's a loner, so he'll take the first girl who he'll come across, expresses any interest in science. But I don't know. It just fell flat.
Well, there's the love at first sight,
right?
It's just it felt.
There's the love at first sight aspect, but even Marty talks about that with Jennifer. He said it was love at first sight with Jennifer. We don't question that relationship.
It's just not as strong as the first movie. With respect to the love story.
No, there's nothing. No, I'm not saying that it's strong as there's nothing as strong as the first.
Not a love at first sight, but a love at first act, almost, because he comes to her rescue, and then it's kind of love at first sight after that point, because she never really saw George McFly, if you know what I mean. She always looked past. Now she'll see him, and that's love at first sight. Here, it's a little different. It's not as strong.
It is different for sure. We got to give Doc his emotional payoff. I guess that's part of the motivation. We got to give Doc his emotional payoff.
That's what I mean. It's just, okay, we got to find another love interest. Let's find someone for Doc. He's got to find his happy ending, too. It's just
they
wrap
found
everything up in a nice little package.
Yeah, but that's we found him a pretty scientist girl. I mean, that's what we're gonna do, right? I mean, she's got more depth than Jennifer.
This would feel like, even though Return of the Jedi kind of wraps everything up in a nice little package, it feels like in the midst of Luke trying to do everything, they had to cram in a movie where he had a love interest in Return of the Jedi as well.
Here's the difference, though, is Doc finds his future with her. He finds it in the past, but that's what it ends up being about, is finding your future. And that's what happened.
Did you read that off a Hallmark card? I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, it was a Hallmark card, and it had a pretty elephant on it. What do you want me to do?
I don't know. Let's just agree to disagree. I completely disagree.
But it's about, okay.
I know that's what the movie is about. It's just not strong.
I don't even know where my notes are. I think I just scribbled on my notes, Harry is the devil here. I didn't even do that much. Okay, so here's one thing I did want to bring up here. So let's talk about Marty a little bit, because we haven't really gone into his character a bit. So they added some items in part 2 and part 3 that weren't in the first one, where he doesn't like being called chicken or whatever. He doesn't like being called a coward. And that was not in the first one. In the first one, where he is interacting with George, and he can't believe how much of a pussy George is, right? Like, this is his dad, and he's just a gigantic wuss. And part of him sort of training George to be more confident was just like his incredulity at this guy being such a giant pussy. I think that's kind of what led into the more obvious overtones of, what are you, yellow? I kind of want to talk about that thread a little bit. If we go back to part 1, he didn't try to fuck anything up, but he just kind of fucked things up because of his presence there by accident. And then he tries to fix things. Accidentally kind of gives his father his own courage. He had sort of the same fear of rejection that his father had, but he still would stand up for himself. He gave his own father that. But where did Marty get it originally? If his father didn't have it,
but you don't want to be like your parents.
Yeah,
but we all are.
Well, we are.
We are. That's a thing, though, that he's ashamed of, though, with his father. You see that a lot in the first movie. Marty doesn't say anything. It's just that he's got that look on his face, the way Biff is pushing around his father.
Yeah. And then his son, too.
And he becomes ashamed of that. I did find it odd that they introduced this character aspect in the second one, because it's such a large part of the second and third movies. I mean, it's fine, whatever, but it's a little clunky. I think they could have had a better way to, and again, like, I know that they didn't think that they were ever going to come back and do sequels. So like, okay, well, we got to think of something. I wish that they had tried to incorporate it a little bit more with the idea of he grew up seeing his father getting pushed around. He's like, I'm not going to be like that. And so he overcompensates. I don't know if they really went through all that thought process necessarily, but they do it a couple of times where like somebody calls him chicken and it just kind of escalates. It sort of feels like I'm watching somebody who's written a TV show for the first time.
Yeah, that's what I feel like too, because you're in a situation in the future where the character of Marty McFly, like, he's knocked out his son. He's been instructed by Doc to save the situation, but not getting involved and causing an issue. And just the mere fact of being called a chicken leads him into that chase. And it just feels like it's something that a smart person won't do, and then he still doesn't learn that lesson in the third one. And it's one thing if these character traits are serving the story for a good purpose, but here it just feels like it's serving the story for a gag. In the third one, they're able to kind of wrap it up in a nice little package where he doesn't race at the end and now his hand is okay. So, hey, everything turns out fine. I learned my lesson. So it's okay. It's clunky. Yeah.
No, but he learned his lesson before that, because in the saloon. So if we go back to the first one, basically Marty instills in his father the confidence to stand up for himself, and he, in a crisis situation, punches Biff in the face to rescue Lorraine. And then later on, when he's in the dance and that bucktooth motherfucker cuts in on his dance, he comes back over and bullies that piece of shit to the floor, and he's kind of aggressive there in that situation. And then we kind of come back around here to part 3, and he's in the saloon. Everybody's looking at him to be the hero, to be courageous and go out, and he's like, he's an asshole. Like, I'm not going out there and doing that. I'm not playing his game. He learns his lesson there and tries to talk his way out of the situation. He ends up, punching Mad Dog Tannen in the face with a metal plate in the end. I kind of thought that was an interesting juxtaposition there, where like George had to win the day by stepping up and being more aggressive, and Marty tried to win the day by stepping off, having a more intellectual approach, like talk his way out of the situation, even though he still had to punch his way out. But he tried the talking approach. So
yeah. I think the through line is just not there for me. Like, I see where you're coming from, and I agree, and that's kind of a neat character arc, but I sort of feel like they didn't really consciously tied together very well.
Not only that, if what you're saying is true, Jeff, then it's still inconsistent when he goes back to the present and he's still tempted to race. Because at that point, it would not even be an option for him anymore.
No, I'll tell you why he wasn't tempted.
Oh, man,
because he shifted.
I don't know what you're reading into.
No.
He was tempted.
No, I'll tell you why he wasn't tempted. Because as soon as Needles is like, let's do this, Marty puts his truck in gear. What gear does he put it in right away? Reverse. He doesn't change gears afterwards, change his mind at the last minute. He puts it in reverse right away.
I know it's a movie. It's meant for dramatic purposes, but he would have just, if you're saying he'll talk it out, he would have just ignored it then too. So he wouldn't have even bothered to race backwards.
That was dramatic effect for the movie though.
Yeah, but I don't know. It just feels inconsistent.
Because he's just like, buddy, I'm going to race that asshole. Like, he's like, no, there's no way I would have done that.
Nah, I think they're going to handle it better. You might be right that he didn't switch gears. It doesn't matter. To me, it feels the way it's presented and directed and written, it feels like right up until that green light, he was tempted.
That was dramatic tension, though.
Okay, but then it's still filmed that way, man. Right? It doesn't matter. So then that's the fault of the movie. Yeah,
but that's
the fault of the movie then.
If he put it in reverse right there, he was just fucking with Needles at that point.
If he was fucking with Needles, he wouldn't have raced backwards. Because to me, that means that he had to go back almost so fast because he was right on that line of going forward.
He had to
if he was just calm and rational and he knew what he was doing, he would just not even move.
He's still 17.
Yeah, I was about to say, he's still 17. Give the guy
It's great that you're trying to justify some of these character threads here. It's just, I think there's a lot of stretches here, especially with this third movie.
Well, that's just one man's opinion. All right. Okay, so we'll come back to the end of part 3 in a second here. I just want to revisit a couple of items here before we kind of wrap it up. Let's talk about time travel a little bit, because that's obviously a big part of the film here. So did they get it right? If so, what did they get right? If not, what did they miss? What did they not get right about time travel? What works? What doesn't work about time travel? Nathan, why don't you start?
Well, what works is that you can only do it in a DeLorean. It's the only cool way to no shooting around the sun, no phone booths.
You want DeLorean.
You're not fucking around here, man. You get in that car and you go. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a little hit or miss, I think, with some of the logic. I think they have a lot of neat ideas, but certainly for the first one, a strength is you just sort of accept the movie logic of it. They kind of make it fun. It's weird how you have the time travel aspect, but it's just a plot device for the whole movie, right? Because I mean, aside from a couple of science fiction aspects, it's not necessarily about the dangers of time travel. Parts of it are, but that's not in front and center, even though they're trying to in the first one, he's trying to save himself, but it's only sort of tangentially related to time travel. He's just sort of in the wrong place. They have weird logic problems. Thing with If being able to go back to the future. I felt like leaving Jennifer on the porch, that it didn't follow some of that movie logic. But I don't care. In these movies, you just don't care about that because it's just fun enough that you can sort of gloss over it. The way they portray it is, I think, functional for the story, and they have fun with it.
I'm no scientist, but I mean, I think they, on a broad level and a very simplistic level, handle it right, because this is supposed to be fun, goofy adventure with a bit of science fiction in there. I mean, they do talk about paradoxes and causality loops and these kind of things, because the consequences of this, with the exception of yourself, you'll never be born and you're disappearing right in front of your eyes. I mean, that's a bit weak. Who knows what the right answer is, but I enjoyed it for the most part. In part 2, when you're talking about the parallel universe or parallel timeline and these kind of things, I enjoyed those aspects of it. For young kids and even adults of today, just to enjoy it on a very broad level, I think it's very appealing and it's pretty clever, if you ask me.
I mean, I have my problems with some of the logic. I mean, to kind of witness yourself disappearing and the photo disappearing, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense there. No. My only problem with the first one, if they had removed that, it's almost perfect. And then as we get to 2 and 3, it feels like it's less important, what could happen with time travel there. Some of the things that I did like is when Marty comes back. In the first one, when he comes back to the future 10 minutes early and he witnesses the events there, I mean, that felt like a cool idea to portray it. You could see what had happened to you already. That was the only scene where anybody had witnessed events that had already happened, and I thought that was kind of neat. The best part, I thought, was Marty writes a letter to Doc in the past. You're going to get shot, take appropriate precautions, and Doc rips up the letter, but then decides not to, and it turns out he was wearing a bulletproof vest the whole time, or wasn't, but that was the best piece of causality there, the best loop. The alternate 1985 I thought was pretty neat. But they're a little inconsistent with how it works, like with Biff coming back to 2015 after he changed the past. You know, the explanation that I've read from Zemeckis and Gale was that the future had changed around them, but they didn't know because, you know, they're just standing out in the street, so they wouldn't have known it changed around them. You know, okay, I guess. So there's a little inconsistency. Yeah, it's okay. It's an okay explanation. I guess it's fine. But
I always thought of it as because they didn't belong in that time, they'd still sort of anchored that timeline, which would have allowed Biff to kind of come into it and exist as himself. And then once they left, then it was kind of gone in a way. Not very scientific. I mean, I think I'm taking that from a pen and paper role-playing game, that particular time travel logic. So, but I mean, that's the way I kind of worked it out in my mind.
They sort of deliberately left it open-ended. I mean, there is a scene, if you go and watch the special features on the Blu-ray, they did film the scene where Biff disappears or vanishes in the future after he gets out of the DeLorean. So they decided to cut that because they wanted to leave it, you know, a little bit more ambiguous, just so you don't, I think it was more just so you don't linger on it. And you're like, well, what the fuck's going on here? That, then what happened before? And that's okay. I think that's all right. So let's talk about just the ending of part 3 real quick, where Doc comes back in the train time machine. He's got the kids. Harry, let's start with you. Just the finale to the trilogy with the train coming back and Doc with the kids and the family and everything. What are your thoughts here on the finale?
It's a kid's movie, family movie, so, you know, you got to have that happy ending, because I think if you wanted to be a bit more, I wouldn't say ballsy, but a bit more realistic, I think just like how Doc was sending him mail originally and the end of the second one, I think maybe he could have seen through, they could have shown a little scene through history that, you know, he found that Doc had a good life, and then maybe at the end, after Jennifer, they could went to visit maybe one of his descendants. They could have done something with makeup. I think that could have been a bit more of a heartfelt moment instead of just him flying in and everything's okay and he's got a magic train and fuck, I mean, geez, I hated that fucking train.
Yeah.
It's a little goofy. You know, it's a family movie meant for kids. I'm not a fan of it. I wasn't a fan of it when I was young. Just felt a little too tidy. And I know you don't have a lot of time left to deal with a suggestion like what I said, but it's necessary, I guess, to wrap the movie up, but I'm not the biggest fan.
Oh, I don't even know where to begin on how to break this down.
Like again, he comes in during the day 2, right in the middle of the street on the train tracks.
Yeah. Also, the DeLorean, when they had the whole plan to get Marty back, again, just daytime, you know, right in the middle of traffic too. You know, it's crazy. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I get it. It's a family film. You want to have this type of ending and you know, kind of have one last wow for the movie, I guess. And again, you know, just we're doing all the same things we did before. So we got to end it on the same note. We got to fly into the camera kind of thing with basically it is a magic train. No way he could have built that fucking train in the past to go to the future. I'm going to say it right now. It is not possible. I will buy a lot in these movies.
No, he went to the future. He built a regular train with a flux capacitor and then went to the future and had the cover conversion done.
Wrong.
But that's what he said. Possible? He's already been to the future.
I know. I get that. But how did he build the train in the past?
I don't know. It's powered by steam.
Fuck that.
No. It was powered by love.
You know, that is as good as an explanation. It is as good of an explanation.
Yeah, it's pretty hokey. This whole thing is a trope and it's hokey.
Yeah,
and, I don't know.
And I get why they did it. All right? It's like, yeah, I understand what's going on here, but you know, it's funny and stuff, but it's just like, oh, all right, fine, I guess if that's what we're doing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm not bothered so much by the flying train or the kids or the whole thing. What bothered me about the end, I mean, all of that's ridiculous, but Doc gives Marty the picture. It's all good. We get our feel-good moment. And then bonehead Jennifer comes up, and she's a bonehead. And she's like, Doc, I took this piece of paper from the future, and now it's erased. What does it mean?
To explain it. Everything's going to be okay.
A moron. But what I didn't like is...
It's the filmmakers,
no, it's not about
the writers trying to tell the audience everything is okay.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, Doc turns to the camera. I mean, he turns to Jennifer, but he's turning to the audience and saying, It means your future's not written yet. It's whatever you want it to be. And it's like, you know what? That's not the facts from what you've showed us.
Yo, Joe.
The fact is that
They should have ended with that. Yo.
they should have been, yo, Joe. The fact is that your future's only not written. Your future's only what you make of it if you already know what it is, because then you could change it. Marty's future was that he was getting in that accident, growing up to be a worthless bureaucrat with kids that didn't like him who were going to jail. If Marty didn't know his future, that's exactly what was going to happen to him. His future was written because he didn't know what was going to happen. The only reason he was able to rewrite his future is because he knew what it was, so he was able to change it.
Yeah.
And that is contradictory to the message at the end. That's what I didn't like about Doc's ending, is like, you can do whatever you want with your future. It's like, yeah, but you could only change it if you know that you made the wrong choice.
And he's also passing that lesson on to his kids, because he talked about the dangers of time travel and yet couldn't stop himself from building another time machine, having kids so they could just go have adventures through time.
Well, because Doc knows, is like, well, your life's you're going to make mistakes and you're not going to know your life's going to be shit. Let's make sure.
He's like, fuck this dirty shit water. I'm not dealing with this. We're going to the future.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to the future. We're going to figure out what the right answer is, and we're going to change it. Doc's a Republican, no doubt about it. So,
whoa.
Not to get political. That's kind of the end of Back to the Future. So, Harry, why don't you start? Thoughts on the overall trilogy? Anything else you want to bring up that we might have missed?
In general, I thought the biggest improvement was adding Elizabeth Shue to Back to the Future 2.
Even though she's fucking basically Rohypnol right in the first fucking scene. Nice pants.
Yeah, nice everything. Libyans. We forgot to talk about Libyans.
We forgot to talk about the Libyans. Let's talk about the Libyans.
Yeah, no, I love that part. The one thing that stands out for Back to the Future to me is just a lot of franchises, whether it's trilogies or beyond that, is that the first one is generally viewed as it's really tight, it's focused, it's genuine classic, and it deserves to be that. The sequel kind of, if it's a good enough sequel, flips it, adds in different layers and can flip it on its head. And it can be an enjoyable movie in that right. And it can be argued to be whether on par, better, or just slightly less valued than the original. And then the third one, or kind of the capper to a trilogy or a franchise, it falls into the sequelitis where it's franchise fatigue and running out of ideas. And it's really hard to kind of wrap up a story very effectively. And I feel that those tropes are well represented here in Back to the Future in this trilogy.
Yeah, like the first one I think is definitely a real classic. The other two I think kind of fall into a problem where, with some sequels, the filmmakers, like that initial passion for the first one is just not there for later movies. I don't think they necessarily half-assed it, but I think they were kind of put into a position where like, okay, well, we want to do this, we still have a love for the property, but maybe they really did think that, this will work because these are all the things we did before and, they were great jokes. So if we kind of do it again, maybe they thought they were putting a twist on it. Plus sometimes, when you go from writing it right to shooting it, right to editing it, things can kind of change and stuff like that. So I don't know if they ever had like some different ideas. Without kind of getting into any sort of ranking system, it's, a little disappointing to see how they turned out. And they're not like the worst movies in the world by any stretch. I think it's just a matter of expectations.
There's certainly no question that, it's hard to follow such a, Harry, you talked about it a lot. The first one is so tight. I mean, it's a very tight screenplay. It's well edited. It's well directed. And then 2 and 3, I kind of see 2 and 3 as one film, because those two sort of stick together. They're more consistent with each other than either of them is consistent with the first one. And there's a separation there. And even though it's still Back to the Future, we have the same characters. The second and third ones don't have the same look or feel as the first one. They introduce new ideas and new themes. But that being said, I mean, there's some value to the sort of the back half of the trilogy, if you want to say it that way, where they try to expand the characters. It just succumbs to a little bit of, trying to do the bigger and better when you make a sequel. Spectacle of the future in the second one, and it's a little goofy. And then the third one where they're doing the spectacle of the Old West, and it just doesn't seem to quite line up to what was happening in the first one. The first one was a much more personal story about the family, right? About the McFlys. And then the second and third one aren't really about the family story. They're more about saving the timeline, if you will. So it gets a little big for its britches, I suppose. I don't know that they lost the passion. Like they wanted to come back and they didn't really have much to come back to. So they had to force the story out a little bit. Considering those restraints, I think they did all right there. So well, let's talk about the rankings. Nathan, why don't you rank the films for us, and we'll maybe get into our customary rankings of what your recommendations are for the films, and is this a rare antiquity, as we like to say?
As far as rankings go, I mean, the first one is at the top. I find it a little hard to classify the second two, to be honest. I mean, I think they're pretty much at par with each other. And, you know, Jeff, you're right. They're kind of like one movie in a way. You know, probably helps with the fact that, you know, they shot him at the same time. So I can't believe I'm saying this. I'm actually ranking the third one a little bit above the second one. A couple of years ago, it would have been the other way around. But I don't know, just something else has happened. And that's just how I'm going to rank them.
Harry, what do you think?
I guess I'll talk about the individual movies and then a trilogy as a whole. So individually, I enjoy watching the second one more than the first one on a personal level, just because I find it slightly a bit more rewatchable. But in terms of a recommendation, the best one is definitely the original, followed by the second one. And the third one is Attack of the Clones, garbage level shit. So it belongs
that's
in
tough,
that junk heap.
Attack of the Clones?
Yeah,
Shit.
it belongs, you know, they can hold each other's hands in the Sarlacc as they are digested over 1,000 years. And as a trilogy, I showed my cousins, younger cousins, had never seen, you know, they're in their 20s now. They had never seen Back to the Future, and I showed them the first one. They loved it, and I never wanted to show them the second two because I've always wanted them to see the second one, but then I'd have to wrap it up with the third one, and I'd feel that would tarnish their enjoyment of the brilliance of the first one, even though I enjoy the second one, if you get my meaning. As a trilogy, I think, as a whole, it doesn't really work. It works in terms of telling a story, but it's not strong enough for me to recommend the trilogy as a whole. With respect to a rare antiquity, I would say actually the first two are rare antiquities, and the third one is not. And the reason why I say the second one is because I think it adds enough layers with respect to the time travel to make it interesting enough. And I never saw anything like that before. So I would rank the first two as definite recommends and rare antiquities, and the third one is just such a steaming pile of crap. It just ruins the trilogy, in my opinion.
Okay, so if I got to rank, I mean, obviously the first one, Head and Shoulders, is the best film of the three. Harry, I'm kind of with you sometimes where I like watching part two just as a movie, almost above the first one. But I'm almost with Nathan in that three seems to be a better film than two. Like, just as a movie, I don't find it a steaming pile of crap, although I mean, I don't begrudge you your opinion. I can see what you're saying. This is a tough one. I mean, Rare Antiquities speaking, I think that whether you take the first one as its own or you take the trilogy as a whole, I mean, typically when we're talking about Rare Antiquities, we're talking about more obscure films, and these are not obscure films. These are big hits, and Back to the Future, but they don't make movies like this. Again, we've talked about this before, where movies from the 80s tend to have these more simplistic storylines, but in a good way. Like, we don't get the customary twist at the start of the third act. It's a very clean narrative thrust through the film, and I really appreciate that. I like that, where we have good performances and a likable protagonist. You know, part two, I mean, I love the future. I love some of the darkness to it. Part three is goofy, no doubt about it, but I mean, I think the performances kind of take it. So, man, I don't know. I'm going to rank two above three, but just barely. Rare Antiquity, yes, for Back to the Future, no to the second two. So the one thing I want to talk about before we wrap everything up, guys, is we know it's customary now in Hollywood to remake every motherfucking movie ever known. Like Ghostbusters, we've had Transformers, Star Wars. I mean, everything's getting rebooted. This is probably not going to get rebooted because Bob Gale and Bob Zemeckis own the rights, and they both have indicated that it will never happen in their lifetime, if ever. But could that work today? What would it look like?
I'll tell you exactly what it looks like. Fucking Fast and the Furious traveling back into the past and into the future and creating one convoluted big pile of shit. That's what it'll look like. So no, It should never be remade.
All right.
If it was done, it would be terrible. It would have to be so much more complicated to be not only be different, but I feel that even though I think Back to the Future is pretty simple and is timeless, I still have doubts that millennials of this age would be able to sit through it. Just not enough twists and turns that they are used to. I think there is, it's just there's a risk there. I don't trust millennials, they suck.
You couldn't do it with, like, if it was a 30-year gap, because I don't think that right now is all that different from 30 years ago, whereas I feel like the 80s is different enough from the 50s. There's enough comedic material. But if they did remake it, the way it would look like is Marty and Doc zipping around through time. Biff would also have like his own time traveling car. It would be like this crazy, they'd be chasing through time and blah, blah, blah. And then the third act twist would be that Doc Brown is Marty from the future.
No, and also Doc Brown at the end of the third one, at the end of the trilogy, he'll fly in on a time traveling dinosaur. That's what he'll do.
Holy shit. Amazing. Okay, now I want.
Yeah, I'd watch Time Traveling Dinosaur. That'd be pretty awesome.
No, I want the movie to be about the time traveling dinosaur.
Yeah, so do I. That'd be great.
And nobody else?
Nobody else, just him.
If you were to remake it, finding the right actors and the right story, they fucked Ghostbusters, they fucked Transformers. I don't think it'd be possible. They
did remake Star Wars: A New Hope.
A little bit outside. The only thing that I'd want to see, the only thing I could see, because it'd be a bit of a joke. Like if you're going to portray the 80s, it'd be a bit of a joke. But if you had Marty go back to the 80s, and then Doc Brown is like, well, who's president of the United States in 2017? And Marty's like, Donald Trump. And it'd be like, Donald Trump? That'd be the only thing I want to see.
That'd be the only joke. I'm actually usually okay with remakes, but there's two that I do not want, and it's Back to the Future and Big Trouble in Little China. Any other remake, I'm fine with, even though they are remaking Big Trouble in Little China. I'm not okay with that.
Till the cameras start rolling, I don't think that one's going to happen.
I don't know. The Rock has a power in him to make this bullshit happen, but
I could live with Big Trouble in Little China if it was The Rock and no one else.
No,
I'll tell you right now.
That's a whole other discussion.
Anything is possible now. If Star Wars was, given a soft reboot here, anything is possible. Nothing is.
Yeah, and I have read that where they're saying that as long as they're alive, it's not going to happen. But yeah, Harry, I kind of agree with you. Like, I don't think that kids this day would really think it's all that great.
Yeah.
No, right. Because it's more of a simple story, right?
Yeah, I don't think there's a market for it.
No, there's not a market for it. Have to be stories like this now are happening on TV. Like I feel as time traveling storyline is more suited for TV, a dumb TV show.
Yeah. Well, and there is like 4 TV shows right now with dumb time travel tropes. This is too simple to be remade. I don't think it's going to happen. I think that's Back to the Future, guys. Thanks for coming on the show. As is our custom, Harry, why don't you melt our faces with your next selection?
Well, I don't think I'll melt your face, but game over, man, game over. I had a different pick. But with the untimely death of great character actor Bill Paxton, I changed my pick, and we will review the one movie he did direct and star in 2001's thriller Frailty.
All right, interesting. That's our special edition, a podcast of Rare Antiquities, episode number 30, as we truck along. Nathan, thanks for joining the show tonight. We appreciate your opinions.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and Harry, thanks for coming on the show and disparaging one of the greatest trilogies of all time. You can go fuck yourself. Thanks for coming out.
I cannot get the ship out.
That was a little harsh. Sorry.
You're not going to re-record that ending?
No, we're going to leave it as is. It's raw. All right. Well, thanks, guys. It was fun, and we'll see you next time.
Well, that's very nice. Thank you very much. Now, why don't you make like a tree and get out of here?